Survivor specialist Phil and Alexa are back, and today we have a very special episode where we are joined by one of our favorite people in the Survivor community, and I'm sure somebody you all recognize, if not by appearance, but at least by the voice. We have Peridiam joining us to pretty much take a trip down memory lane here. Peridiam, thanks so much for joining. Looking forward to this podcast.
Thank you, Phil, for having me. Yes, it is I. The voice has a face. We're talking Survivor. I haven't talked Survivor in a hot minute. It's been 3 months now. Big Brother nonstop. It just ended at midnight last night. Clock struck 12. I am turned back into a Survivor fan. I have my buffs. My Survivor knowledge is dusting, getting the rust off. I'm excited. I'm really looking forward. This subject matter for this podcast for me was so much fun to dive into because it's not super serious, and it really lets me talk about a lot of underreported people that I would say in 3 years of making Survivor content, I think this subject matter for this podcast is the most randomized list of players that somehow makes sense. And so I'm just interested and excited to talk about these 10 people I have.
And especially in the past year, all we've talked about is not just Survivor, but Survivor winners in general, and the winners that did get on Winners at War and the winners that didn't get on Winners at War. So it's really nice to talk about players that were really good, that will occasionally pop up on second chance 2 possibilities maybe, but aren't often reported on. So I know we all kind of took slightly different approaches to what our criteria was for this. Phil, what did you base this off of?
So let me kind of explain what we're doing here. If you're looking at the title, I called it The Best Forgotten Survivors of All Time featuring Peridiam. I had no idea what to call this. So essentially what we decided was, since Peridiam is such a big fan and, all of his stories or all of his videos on YouTube are very much these huge moments from Survivor history or characters who, are a little forgotten or some of the biggest characters, a lot of these really fun list videos. We figured, let's do since Survivor's not on, it has vanished from our TVs for the first time in 20 years. Let's talk about some of the players who have completely vanished as well and who have just disappeared off the face of the earth, but were so big at the time when they played, or maybe had a big fan base, even if they weren't really popular, maybe they just had a huge impact on their season, that if a heroes versus villains, if people were doing returning seasons every year, they would have been on it, kind of like what we saw in the 30s, but have kind of been forgotten to time. And at this point, it's unlikely we'll ever see them again. So my criteria personally, when I was doing this, exactly what I just said, I kind of went by were they a big character on their season that we saw them? I only went with one-time players. And I kind of threw out a lot of the winners I do have one winner on here, but I threw out a lot of the winners that were discussed during Winners at War. Because to me, those are, now all of a sudden they're in the spotlight. Vesepia is in the spotlight. Yes, she disappeared, but in my book, she came back a little bit into the spotlight because everybody wanted to talk about her. So I kind of went a different route of winners that nobody really gave a crap that they weren't on there, and other players like that, where when a second chance list comes up, they're not mentioned, but man, they really do deserve a second chance. Alexa, what did you do? And then I want to hear Peridiam just tell us that we're wrong.
So I followed that a bit. I included some winners, but also put in parentheses non-winners too, because I wasn't sure if we wanted to include them. Same for me, that nobody has returned. So all of mine are one-time players as well. Mine are not so much vanished, but I guess if I'm going to use the word vanished, I would say vanished in terms of production's point of view, because I think these are players who had a huge emphasis on their season, absolutely either could have won or had a huge part in their season, but will not come back for whatever reason, whether it's their decision or production reason. So I do have a good amount of older school players, because I think there's a lot of their time has passed. No one's going to care about X season anymore. So that's my perspective. I guess overall, this list, I think for all 3 of ours, are going to apply to, and most people who listen to this, super fans, because I think we're going to be diving into a lot of well, do you remember in this season they did that one thing? So I think if I showed this list to my parents, they'd be very confused.
That's what it's supposed to be, though. My parents have watched every season, and they should have no idea who I'm talking about when we do this.
Yep.
Peridiam, what was your criteria doing this?
So it's funny you say that. I was just thinking the same thing. I think that, so my wife and I have gone back and she's pretty much helped me rewatch a lot of the seasons of Survivor and Big Brother since we started dating was 7 years ago. So like for me, I look at the same thing. I'm like, how many of these players would she actually remember? And the funny thing is I think she would only remember one person, and that happens to be the person that I have ranked number 1 on my list, which is making me laugh a little bit, but I don't think she'll recognize maybe one other person. But I want to say, okay, so this list was, you build this to me, and I really was I'm very technical with my videos I put together. As a super fan, it just happens. And so it was right. You said 10 one-time players who each played good to great games, but we would likely never see them play again. And so I did create a list with no winners on it. Okay. Because I felt like if I did include the winners, which like you said, we've been doing a lot of talking about the winners, both people who were and were not on Winners at War. I decided to cut the winners out, even though there are definitely a couple of one-time winners who I think I would put in the top 10 for one-time best games. I would say it's like unavoidable to have like someone like Earl on this top 10 list, but for the sake of like interesting discussion and bringing up people that like, I would probably bump Earl or put Earl in and cut off like my number 10 and number 9. And that's kind of a shame because there are some people I'd like to talk about who just never really get talked about at all. But yeah, this is going to be this is definitely going back more than it is talking about modern Survivor. In fact, I basically said like because of the fact that we don't know who would potentially come back in the future, I tried to gauge like, where do I draw the line between somebody being potentially coming back versus like, yeah, they're not likely to come back based on information I know of these people. And then just like, what are the odds that this player really comes back in the near future or at all? Like, I wouldn't have called Sierra Dawn Thomas ever coming back onto Survivor. And I'm like, if that is the game changer for this podcast, if Sierra Dawn Thomas is the bar I draw, like anyone is possible to come back then. So I basically didn't recruit anyone from my top 10 list that are forgotten from like the last 5 seasons.
I agreed.
I don't have Sierra Dawn Thomas on my list. So I think we're or a Sierra Dawn Thomas-esque player. Yeah, I don't have anyone from the past 5 seasons either. I do have one person from the 30s, but that is it.
I have two people from the 30s. No, yeah, 2 people from the 30s in this 10 list.
This is how pretentious and obnoxious I am, and this is why Alexa and I work together. The most recent player I have on my list is from season 19. So that's the most recent. I went really far back because, so here was my thinking. I cut out, and this was just my own personal preference, but I cut out anybody from who was a pre-merge because I could get so lost in a pre-merge season, whether it be talking about Gina or Hunter, or going all the way to Bradley and Brendan Shapiro, or, somewhere in the middle going to Angie and James Miller and Ibrahim and all of these people. I could do a whole pre-merge podcast. So for me, I kind of took that out and I looked more at like players who made it really far. And like I'm talking like these are players that I remember like watching this, maybe not even with my parents, but with friends who maybe only watched that one season of Survivor because they either lived with me in college or they were just over when it was on a lot of the times in high school or something like that. And they were like, man, that guy would come back and play another season, right? Or that girl would come back and play another season. And me being a Survivor fan, I'm like, probably not. But also like we've never heard this person's name really come up in recent seasons at all. So I did base a little bit on that. And then also I threw in some of my hot takes from my top 100 list, which, Peridiam, I know that you were a part of that as well. I don't know how much you heard my top 100, but I know I pissed quite a few people off with some of my one-time players who I ranked somewhere near 27. Let's just put it that way. Yeah, let's just put it that way. So, but no, I think this will be fun. And I have one winner and I could remove that winner. And then I actually would end up putting a newer school season player on there, which would make it a little bit more maybe digestible for people who are like, hey, I haven't watched the season before Heroes versus Villains, dude. Like, give me a break. Maybe
what we could do is why don't we go without the winners and then maybe at the end, because I assume that I had 3 winners like 3 in and out winners. Phil, it sounds like you had one. I think we all have a general idea of who those winners could be. So maybe at the end we could quickly touch on
We could
that.
also talk about them throughout. I mean, because when we're talking about these seasons, I think it'll come up. But so Peridiam, did you rank them just one to? I broke it into 5 men, 5 women, and I did kind of rank them as the men and women. Did you just rank it as 1 to 10, or did you do it that same way?
I did 1 to 10, but it's almost even 5 to 5 regardless. I think there's like 6 men, 4 women. Okay. So, but I did decide to try and do my best to that was probably it was easier to find the 10 than it was to rank them from 1 to 10.
Agreed.
Right.
I honestly don't know how deep I can go into deciding the difference between my number 10 and my number 9. But I did rank them from 1 to 10.
Gotcha. So I guess we should start this at 10. And Alexa, I know that you have it 1 to 5, 1 to 5, and I have it 1 to 5, 1 to 5. We can kind of figure it out and jam it in there, and
we'll do something on the fly here.
We'll get that. I do want to preface though, I do not have Dan Fuego on my list because of my criteria.
Now.
So I just want everybody who is joining, all of Dan Fuego's family, friends, all of you, to know that I wish I could have put him on this list, but I think that everybody in the community would have screamed at me, so I didn't do it, even though Dan Fuego is the forgotten king of Survivor. Okay, I feel better now.
Okay, well, now that we've done it.
I want to, all right, guests go first. Peridiam, who do you got at your number 10 spot then?
Okay. Number 10 is a character. I'm curious. I always like to play little games here and there. It's a player from Survivor Palau, and I'm curious to know if you guys have any people that jump to the front of your mind for one-time players who should come back, but likely won't, from Survivor Palau. Do you have any ideas?
Yes.
Who do you think?
You go first, Phil.
2 people that I had on my list, and I didn't include one of them because I actually think a lot of people always discuss that they should be there. And then another one who just kind of got cut at the last second, Ian and Greg would be my 2.
Okay. Double
I'll take the women's side of this. I'm going to say Angie or Jen if, we live in a world where you can just put someone back in.
Okay. I put Greg as my number 10. And one of the big reasons why was that I think if it wasn't for that last minute final 6 flip from Ian flipping Katie, I know that he was still not in a good position, but I think Greg was the end game of Survivor Palau has a lot of really good players that just Tom happens to have the willpower to push through that 12-hour endurance competition. It shows you how far he's willing to go. And he does get some lucky breaks here and there. He wins a ton of immunities, which is great for him. But I think Greg, on a lot of other seasons of the show, could have been a winner. I think he certainly had the capacity to strategically. He sets himself up well in the majority to start the season out. Obviously, it's a very unique, one of the most unique seasons ever, where the fact that his tribe just totally obliterates it. I mean, same goes for Ian, same goes for Tom, same goes for all of them, really. So it's tough to really gauge the first half of the game because they kind of all are just sort of coasting, but he does set himself up well enough that he could have potentially pushed through the end game and found himself as the winner. I think he probably would have seen himself with Jen and Katie in that final 3 if he could. And I wouldn't be surprised if he wins based on what we saw with the buoy as the final immunity challenge. I could see him probably beating Jen or Katie in that final 2. Hard to judge, of course, and there's a lot that has to happen to get there. So I don't have him as higher than number 10. And I almost didn't even have him on my list at all. But I do think hypothetically at the final 6, there is that infamous rock, or not the rock draw, but Ian gets Katie to flip to join them to vote out Greg, which was a blindside. And Katie was supposed to go with Greg and Jen, and then it ended up not working out for him. But hypothetically, had it say been a rock draw and Katie and Jen and Greg end up prevailing through that, I think there's a good chance that Greg could have possibly won. So I think that he played a pretty good game. Totally forgotten, and he's definitely never going to come back. I don't think we're ever going to hear about Greg again. So.
Right. And I think Greg, and I guess pretty much everybody from that original tribe, just really suffers because that first half of the season, we don't even know. He doesn't even need to play. We don't even know how he would play. And once we do get signs of him being strategic and the sign of him wanting to take a leadership role, then Tom plays one of the best games that we'll ever see. So I'm completely with you in that you put Greg on another season, or if you take Tom out of the equation, I think Greg is a very clear winner for this season.
And Greg missed my list literally by one person, and it's me removing. I removed Chris Doherty because we're saying like we're not gonna like we're kind of all in agreement. Don't include winners, and that would have been my one winner because nobody was talking about Chris should have played winners at War. Where's Todd? Where's Earl? Where's Fabio? Didn't get a call. What's going on? But nobody cared about Chris, and I still think he's top. I have him as the 4th greatest player of all time. I think he's amazing, but. Ooh. Yeah, nice. I know. Hot takes are coming your way.
We'll do that.
That is a pretty hot take. I like Chris. I don't know if I put him at top 4, but
that's where I had him, and I got yelled at a lot. But all of that being said, I was going to put Greg here because people forget that Greg was the biggest adversary to Tom once Kobe got voted out of the game. And he was like, Kobe was just like, he was ready to go. He was ready to break this whole alliance apart. And despite Greg working with Tom, Greg ultimately goes home because he's a threat and because he's kind of plotting against all of them. And people kind of forget about that. And I would have said Ian Rosenberger for this, but I left him out the same way I left out Sean, because there is such a cry for those types of players to play again. People want to see Sean Rector so bad. People want to see Ian. So not as bad as they want to see Sean, but people do want to see Ian. And Sean has very much put himself back into the spotlight. Sean is very much a part of this community now. And he is very, people are starting to be like, oh, I should go back and rewatch, Marquesas to see this guy. But I could see Sean coming back and playing again. I could see a wild situation where Ian, for some reason, comes back, or even if he doesn't, he is way less forgotten than Greg is. And Greg is the type of player, I mean, on a normal season where, like Alexa, you said, if Oolong doesn't lose every single tribal council, there is a good chance that Greg could have been a fan favorite on that season because he would have gotten a lot more screen time early on. And ultimately it didn't work out that way, but he just missed my list. Like I literally crossed his name off on my final sheet to put somebody else's name on who nobody's going to agree with. So I feel good about that. Alexa.
I will say that you bring up an interesting point where for me, there's I have a lot of honorable mentions that I didn't put in my top 10, and Sean Rector was one of them because I feel like right now more than ever, I feel like Sean is really popped up, and I think that I could see Sean come back, and I would love to see Sean come back. I put him on my second chance to fan list. So for him, for that aspect, I was like, you know what, I guess I'll draw the line and not put him in my top 10 for players that we have forgotten about, that players that not even so much forgotten about, but just I don't see a realistic chance of them coming back, or I don't feel like they're just likely to say yes. That was a big aspect of how much of my knowledge do I know of this player's desire to play Survivor again? And Sean, I think would love to play Survivor again. Right. Obviously someone like Greg, I even think Sean is more likely to come back than someone like Ian. So I don't know.
Yeah. I think Sean is actually too focal to be on this. I just think there's no way
from one of the earlier seasons.
And imagine if Survivor were to say after this is all over, they say, okay, we're going to do an all returning player season for season 41. Sean and Vesepia, we want both of you on the season. There is no way they're saying no to that, because Sean and Vesepia getting the chance to come back and play again in this type of situation, in this type of just climate of America right now, I think they would jump at the opportunity, and I think it would be amazing to watch. And so I didn't include V on here either. She wouldn't have even been really one of the winners I would have considered, because she's been very vocal that she wants to play Survivor again. And I think if she continues to be vocal, we're going to see Vesepia on our TVs at least one more time.
Yeah, and that was another thing that made me debate, do I even put the winners on this list at all? And if I do I put V on this list because she played a great game, and I don't know if she's likely to come back. The fact that I don't think she was contacted for Winners at War is that's a huge tell. But then I'm like, things have changed. I don't know. But ultimately I chose to just not put any of the winners on. So
gotcha. Alexa, who did you have as your 10th?
I guess if I'm gonna do if I'm gonna do 1 through 10, I have Marty from Nicaragua on my list. I think if we're gonna talk about if this person was asked, would they say yes or no? I'm going to say he would emphatically say yes. I think he's someone who is probably chomping at the bit to play again. But I think he suffers from being on a season that isn't super popular and ends up being the bane of the existence of the person who ends up winning fan favorite. And so I think with him, you see, he's a good player. He's incredibly smart. He I think it's overshadowed by the best version of him, which ends up being Dom Abate. So I think people are, Dom's going to come back 10 times out of 10 when Marty is not going to. But I think with Marty, you have a really good player who also has a bit of a bite to him. And he's not an obvious villain per se, but I think he has villainous tendencies. And I think that's really entertaining. And at the same time, I think he's not going to get a call.
I thought Marty came back. He did some time traveling. He came back in Kagian, right?
Yeah.
And he got a third chance.
He got a third chance. I know. No, poor Marty, man.
Poor guy.
never got a chance. And
I think he's one of the top 10 most surprising players I've never seen come back, to be honest.
Right. Exactly.
Especially because the season was so unpopular. And so you would think like the whole cast was unpopular, which makes it so, you look at Boston Rob, really at the time, Marquesas's cast was not very popular. Kathy was very popular. Boston Rob was very popular, but that was really, Sean Rector was popular at the time, but it just didn't fit in for the All-Star season. And then you look at a season like Thailand, Xi'an is the only person who they brought back from that season because she was the only one that they found to be even remotely popular. So it's funny that like the same thing didn't kind of transfer over to Marty, who played on a season where we've seen Brenda come back. But I guess like I wasn't dying to see Brenda again. Like I feel like Marty had a bigger fan base in that first season. I feel like Brenda was a straight up villain, and she could have played in a Heroes Villains too, but to bring her back for a fans versus favorites, I think what it really comes down to is I think the men in Survivor, because they dominate so much screen time, if you get a vocal version of yourself that comes 2 seasons later, you're just done. Judd Sargent was on my short list here and I cut him off, but there's been 15 Judd Sargents who have played since Judd, so there's only so much you can do. And I think that's the problem with Marty. I think that's what he ran into. I
think Marty should have come back over like Brandon Hatz or something like that. I think Karen Moen would have greatly benefited from having a couple better strategists on that season.
You mean if they actually had favorites on the season?
Favorites.
That's another thing.
That's neither here nor there.
All right. Peridiam, I'll throw this one to you. This is my most recent player, and it's from season 19. Who could I possibly have as a one-time player from season 19 that could even remotely belong on this list?
I think,
and not a winner.
Not a winner.
Not a winner.
Phil's a huge Natalie White fan.
Yeah, huge.
I like Natalie White too. I think she's very underrated. Gosh, I jokingly was almost gonna put Brett on my list. I don't know if Brett's your answer. I almost was like Brett almost won.
That could be.
He was the first person I wrote down when you said forgotten. I'm like, I almost want to put Brett.
Literally forgotten.
Yeah.
Right. He literally was forgotten at the Final Four, and he was like one idol falling off of a pedestal away from winning like 9-0.
9-0. Literally, if you watch the Ponderosas from Survivor Samoa, every single one of them says, "Man, I really hope Brett hits the final 3." And we're sitting there watching the episode, going, "Who's Brett? Who? What are we talking about here?" Alexa, you got any guess on this?
Yeah, I don't know though. I don't know. I don't know. I was gonna say Brett.
I'm gonna say Jason.
No.
Huh.
Making love is my game. And I'm going with Danger Dave Ball because at the time, and again, this kind of goes back to, did he play a great strategic game? No. But Danger Dave Ball was the most popular person in the Galoo tribe because Eric goes home too early and people kind of forget about him. Kelly, Kelly, that's Purple Kelly round 1 as far as I'm concerned. Shambo was popular, but also like, I feel like Shambo, just because she had a mullet, was cool. Where like
if she didn't have a mullet, people wouldn't like her.
People wouldn't care. And so when I look at Danger Dave was a part of every strategic decision Galoo made. He's got some of the best non-Russell moments of that entire season. He really was kind of the person that we thought would be in the Brett position when you're watching Samoa the first time. Because when you're watching Dave play, he's actually playing the game and he's funny and he's likable and he's the one who is being viewed as more of like the hero to Russell's villain as opposed to Brett, who is literally just there. So I believe that at the time, and granted, in Survivor Samoa, we were desperate for somebody to watch other than Russell. So that's also why I say this. But I think he was the second most popular person on that season while it was airing. There's no way he's coming back. But when you go back and watch his one-liners, he's a worse playing version of Tyson. That's really what he is.
He has out of everyone on that season, he is top 3 personalities on that season.
Yeah, I know. Peridium, do you agree, or are you shaking your head hard on this one?
So I didn't even have Dave on my honorable mentions.
Okay.
So I guess I'm shaking my head. Shaking my head somehow. I think for me, what overrides my like desire to put anyone from Galoo on a list like this is that I just am like, they really screwed that up, like that post merge, and it wasn't even like in a like, oh, they almost had it. Like, I don't know. I mean, I understand like Russell definitely playing that idol was pretty unprecedented at the time, so they couldn't 100%. They didn't have a lot of seasons in the past to work off of compared to today, where you plan for these idols. They didn't do that, so. And it's tough because the editing is so one-sided that like, yeah, Dave basically squeaks through as like number 2 or 3 compared to Russell, who's like far ahead is screen time. So like for me, they're all sort of this giant failure of a purple blob of people, including Brett somehow. I guess that's why I'm like, Dave definitely contributed to like getting Eric out, which was not a good move, and then getting blindsided supremely by Russell playing his idol. So I don't know. I'm like, yeah, I'd probably shake my head. I wouldn't have him in my top 10, but he's definitely like a good personality, and I would love to have him come back. He never will. So It fits.
Yeah.
I honestly think that you proved my point by you being like, he wasn't even on my list. I'm like, Peridium forgot about him. Yes. No, like, I don't know. Danger Dave is just, to me, he's in an era now of Survivor where everything is so game body and serious and all of that. I feel like he was one of the people who did have the personality to go along with the fact that like he had the highest, I think at the time he had the highest IQ to ever play Survivor, which is crazy because he was on a season with a rocket scientist who ended up marrying Parvati. So
higher than Heidi?
Higher than Heidi. I know. Well,
higher than
Heidi might have been second. But,
wow.
But think about that. Danger Dave has a higher IQ than the man who's a rocket scientist and marries possibly the most attractive Survivor player of all time. So that says a lot about him. And I just
it's a great tagline for him.
It's a great tagline. I think that just he was able to make it all work together. And it's kind of like when you go back and you watch Token Chains knowing Tyson doesn't win. You appreciate his one-liners almost more because he doesn't win. And I think Dave kind of has that same type of feel where every time he talks, you're like, you can't take him seriously, but also like he's the only one who kind of like wants to play Survivor from the Galoo tribe. Like, I feel like he was the only real fan maybe on that tribe. And I don't know if you ever saw his audition video, but if you haven't, go check it out. I'm pretty sure it's still on YouTube. He's like dancing in a library. He's a weird dude. And I just think it'd be fun to play again.
Oh, I completely lost my train of thought. Oh no. And he also, in terms of vanishing, in terms of the like Survivor community, he seems to have fallen off the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Which I kind of like.
AMAs on Reddit.
Oh, he did. It was very good.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the one he did in 2018. That one came up. I don't know. He also, I mean, now it's obviously a bad thing to say, but he oddly looked like Kevin Spacey with like a ponytail.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody else gets that vibe.
No, I could see that.
He really
fair.
does.
Like, balding with the ponytail plus Kevin Spacey. Yeah, I see that.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm a big fan of Dave Ball, and that's what I got. I got Dave Ball at my number 10. So Greg, Marty, and Dave Ball. Those are the 3 that we all put in at our bottom spot on this 10. Who wants to go first on the next one?
You go ahead, Peridium.
Okay. I'm just laughing because I'm like ranking these 10 players. I don't know, like this feels like a couple of hot takes are coming, and I could see myself I could see another version of myself disagreeing with me right now.
The ranking part makes this totally confusing.
Yeah, it does. And I'm like, this is what I said when I can't differentiate between 10 and 9, because my number 9 is like, it feels like a hot take. I'm gonna, you know what, this is fun. I'm gonna say I put number 9. I put Lisa Welchel from Survivor Philippines.
I love her.
That's a great pick.
I think Lisa Welchel, she'll never come back. I don't think she ever. I think she was probably asked or something, and she's like, nope. I think she was one and done.
She did an interview with Dalton Ross recently, and I think gave an emphatic no.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. And I think like she was one move away from winning. I think she got screwed hard by Scoopin. I think it was Scoopin was really interested, and he thought he could beat Malcolm or Denise in the final 3. And obviously keeping Denise for the final 4 to beat Malcolm was the idea, because they would rather sit next to Denise than Malcolm. But they had Abby right there at the final 5 with the numbers. So, and Lisa, I think, was going to go that route, and I think that was going to be her ultimate end game. But Skupin didn't want to do that because he didn't think that he needed to do that, because he's like, he thought he was the winner even after the final tribal council happened with Denise. Like, even after all of that, and he got one vote, he still might. I remember thinking he was gonna win the season going into the reunion show months later, and it's like, okay, that shows you how far off he was. And I can immediately be like, I can give some recognition to Lisa. I think she for sure wins in a final 3 with herself, Abby, and Skupin. I think that's for sure. I was looking at the votes, doing some research. I'm like, yeah, I think she has. I've looked into this before too. So really, it came down to, unfortunately, Skupin screwed her over from winning $1 million. And like, she did have a bumpy road to get there. It was very, like, people remember her outbursts, her mental breakdowns at times. She has that infamous pre-merge scene of her getting the hashtag by the well, where she's just totally isolated, and she has a really bad start, but she picks it up. And the fact that this woman, who really didn't seem like she was primed to go play Survivor, was basically one dumb move away from winning it, and it wasn't even because of her own bad play, really. I mean, I guess like the worst you could say is she didn't convince Skupin to not be so delusional.
Right.
And
I don't know. I feel good about her. I don't mind putting her on this top 10 list.
Yeah.
I really like her. I think I feel like I'm a her and Dawn apologist, because with those kind of players, or I guess, well, I was going to say Gabby too. Like, I guess just like women who cry, people have a problem with that. But Lisa, like, she was real, and I always appreciate players who are going to be like that. But I think, like you said, she had no business going that far, but then ends up kind of growing into herself in a way too. And obviously is like the most famous quote unquote person to be on that season. And then, really wants no part of Survivor after that.
And I had Lisa close to making my list, and she was another one, like late cut. So Peridiam, we weren't far off from having very similar people here. And some would argue that I should have went your route and not put Danger Dave on my stupid list. But Lisa was huge in Philippines. Like, she was massive. She is arguably, other than Malcolm, the second biggest character on that season. And people would say, no, it's Abby, or it's Penner, but it really isn't. Lisa gets so much screen time, and we follow her most of the time through the game, her ups, her downs, everything she's going through, because she's kind of our look into the Yellow Tribe, whose name I forget, but she's kind of our Tandang, that's what it is. I always think Dang Rain because of the stupid merge tribe name, but she's kind of our view into the Tandang tribe, because Skupin didn't give Survivor at all what they wanted. RC was confrontational. Abby was so awful. Pete and Artis were kind of just miserable out there. So she really was our view into what was going on at that camp, and she was massive. And I kind of look at her similarly. They tried to make Jane Bright came first. So she was kind of like the more palatable. Thank you, Jane Bright, because Jane Bright, rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. But again, Jane Bright wins fan favorite on that season. Nobody talks about Jane Bright should come back for another season. I think the same thing kind of happened with Lisa. I don't know if that's just because they're older women who people kind of like, you just kind of like throw it out and you're like, great, we had Sunday, we had Dawn. Like, I'd rather the two of them come back than Lisa or yeah, you get it. But anyway, I'm surprised. Or Jane. But I'm kind of surprised that she fell off as hard as she did, considering how famous she is in real life as well.
Yeah. I just look at the fact that she was so close to winning, and it came down to just Skupin deciding to go with Malcolm and Denise at the final 5 over not, and instead listening to Lisa. She had a lot of agency, and obviously she was like emotionally out there, and that's what people are going to remember, because she didn't win. But I think that if Lisa somehow won that season, I think people would be talking a very different story about the game that she played, the moves that she made. She really gets blindsided twice by Skupin throughout that post-merge. That's when the game starts for them, because that whole tribe didn't even go to Tribal Council in the pre-merge. If you rewatch it with the lens that like Lisa could potentially be the winner, she actually does quite a lot. She's like a souped-up version of Sugar or something, who actually wants to win by the end of the season. So.
Not just humiliate
souped up Sugar.
Men.
I love that.
It's a great description of Lisa.
Sugar on steroids.
Alexa, do you want to go next, or should I?
Sure, I'll go next. I was just kind of throwing random numbers into my list to try to make a semblance of a 1 through 10. My number 9, I have Sabrina Thompson from Survivor One World. I think, and she just popped up in the Dalton Ross quarantine questionnaire, which kind of made me think of her. She also gave an emphatic no when asked to come back, which I was actually pretty shocked about because I believe she's been in the running here and there for some seasons. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she was on the second chance ballot. I think like there were rumors that she got contacted for Game Changers. So she's always been around, but she pretty much just said, my time is up with this. I've closed the book. But she comes from a obviously not so popular season, but I think within One World, she is one of the large quotes on shining stars. She really is present during the pre-merge. And I know obviously the pre-merge is Colton's party, but when you go to the women's side, Kim is not talking too much. It's actually a lot of Sabrina. And I think she brings a bit of normalcy to that season too. And I guess you could say that that's what makes it a little boring because Kim and Sabrina are the most normal people and they're also the ones running it. Mm-hmm. But I think she plays a solid game and it's obviously completely overshadowed by how much Kim dominates. But I think Sabrina is someone that nobody is clamoring for, but I think people would be pleasantly surprised as opposed to a Sierra Dawn Thomas, like what the F reaction if she were put on another season.
Yeah, I've included Sabrina a lot in previous videos I've made where I said, like, I want this player to come back, partially because I think that she lost to one of the greatest individual season plays with Kim in One World. I'm like, you know what? If she lost to Kim, like that doesn't that's like losing to like Federer and like the finals or something. Like, it doesn't say that you're a bad player. I think that Sabrina had a lot to offer. It's a shame she didn't get back on second chance. And part of the reason I didn't put her on my list is because of the fact that I didn't even know she wasn't interested. And seeing her on second chance reminded me that she could be someone that we might see at some point in the future still. So I didn't put her on there for the reason of just seeing her potentially get her one of her feet into the door 10 seasons ago. But man, it's a shame.
I didn't even consider her because of that. I didn't read that article, and I'm on the same exact boat as you, Peridiam. I just figured she would want to play again. Like I thought you go for the second chance ballot, but maybe she had a similar experience to Shane where like they drag you along so many times. Eventually you just say, okay, enough with this. Like, let me live my life and stop giving me the false hope. But I assumed Sabrina would play again. So that's why I didn't even consider her. Alexa, good on you for doing your research. I'm very proud of you.
I was stumbling upon Survivor Reddit on a lunch break. So thanks, Survivor Reddit.
Well done. Well done. All right, my number 9, I am going with Sierra Reed from Survivor Token.
Oh, interesting.
That was a quick on the draw. Which Sierra are you talking about?
I know.
Interesting choice.
She was massive, and she made Tyson into what Tyson is. I personally don't believe Tyson plays a second time if he doesn't start on a tribe with Sierra Reed, because as quippy and great as Tyson was, if he does not have the punching bag that is Sierra Reed, he does not get the same response that he got on his season. And I don't think he made it far enough in Heroes Villains or in Tocantins to get asked back for Heroes Villains. But he was recent enough. He had the coach relationship, and he was so ridiculous with the things that he would say to Sierra that I think that's what got him asked back. I think otherwise they could have asked a Shane Powers, or they could have asked somebody from an old, like a Johnny Fairplay, even though I know Probst was still saying I'm not ever going to have him back. But there were other people. Lex Vandenberg could have been somebody they could have asked. But I think Sierra Reed is the reason Tyson played again, and the reason we ever even got to fall in love with Tyson playing 4 times. So I got her here, my strep throat queen. Get out there. And it's a shame that she only made it 7th, but what an entertaining run it was for Sierra.
Yeah, Sierra, Tyson, I would agree with you. There are certain players on these shows where it's the relationship, the dynamic, whether it's for good or for evil, in Tyson's case, that gives them the ability to shine. So I also didn't have Sierra on my list or in an honorable mentions position. I did think about her really quickly. I was like, yeah, maybe. But I think for me, it was more like she just didn't play good enough game to have her in the equation. She was obviously quite like a pariah on that tribe, and that whole season, everyone was just bagging on her hard, and Tyson just got the best quotes aired. So yeah, she's definitely gonna. I think she lives in Australia now or something like that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
Pretty
No,
far out there.
He bullied her out of the hemisphere.
Out
Out of the country. Oh, man.
it's crazy though. I know. I mean, you're right. Like, she didn't play a great game, but she got screwed from the start. She really did. And the fact that she gets as far as she does, and she deals with Brendan and Tyson and Coach, and I mean, she beats Brendan and Tyson because what is she? The bride of the dragon, whatever the hell that means. So she gets
So
to be the bride of the dragon, which is probably the worst nickname in the history of Survivor because it literally doesn't make sense. But
No.
you know, she with her having strep throat off the bat and being voted out right away, and then having to kind of overcome that on a season with arguably two of the greatest villains to ever play Survivor. That's not an easy thing to overcome. And the fact that she made it as far as she did, Alexa, you know, I wanted to put Erin with two N's on here instead, but I ended up going with Sierra Reed instead.
I'm kind of surprised you didn't pick Erin over Sierra.
I like that because it's a more unlikely mention. So I'm glad you went with that.
You know what it is, Peridiam? I have in my delusional brain, Erin with two N's will play Survivor again. Okay?
That's what I was like,
My God.
thinking that Erin will come back?
In my dreams, Erin is on season 41 or season 42 because God, okay, maybe she's on one of your lists, so I don't want to steal anybody's thunder, but Erin with two N's, insanely underrated player, and people have just thrown her out the window. They forget that she's even a player. So
kind of like the Sierra Tyson dynamic, you know, you get that Coach Erin dynamic, you get that infamous line about Coach being a jackass. And, you know, she really kickstarts his Survivor career. I mean, he sort of did it himself, but she was a great person. Yeah, she was a great, you know, person on the other side, giving us the reactions that the audience was thinking. So
absolutely. I think I'm going to go back to back because I do have somebody else from that season. So I just want to do this, and I'll rank them at 8, considering my ranking is just going to be nonsense. I have Taj George.
I also have Taj George.
She was like my number 11.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, Taj is another one. Like, I didn't want to put I didn't want to fill up the female spot here with 3 people from Survivor Tocantins, but man, are the women on Survivor Tocantins so overshadowed for no good reason. Like, no good. I get Coach is a great character and Tyson's a good character and Brendan was fun, but like, why did Taj and Erin and Sierra not get their due? Even Debbie doesn't get her due on this season. And I feel like they just get so overshadowed. And Taj George is somebody who I don't think we'll ever see play again. I think she had her experience. I think her experience is over. And she's somebody, when I brought her up on my top 100 Survivor players list, people were just like, what? Like, you forget
people don't care about her.
You forget how impactful she was on that season.
No, she's so a fan favorite. She's fun. I think it's mostly because Tocantins is like the bromance story for the ages. You know, that's what they've shaped the whole narrative around. And it was really like people who moved through JT and Steven. They were and like Coach and Tyson was the big bad where the season really flipped strategically. And Coach is just too big of a he's got too much life in him to like not be shown, obviously. So unfortunately, yeah, I had Taj. I almost had her in my top 10 and I just put her out. She's pretty much at number 11 here. My issue with Taj, I couldn't deduce, like, they don't show her enough, like you were saying. So I was like, from a good to great game, I don't like, she does okay, but I don't really know what her strategy was post merge. And I couldn't tell, like, was she planning on, I guess, just beating JT or Steven in the final 2, I guess, or the final 3?
I think she thought she could have beaten Steven. I don't think anybody thought they could beat JT, but I honestly think she could have beat
JT. Do you think that's a thing? Like,
I think that's what her plan was.
Maybe. But I think you're right. I think her plan was to ride it out with those 2. And I assume that she had some inkling that she was the third wheel there, but at the same time, maybe not, because you don't really see her looking to make a shift away from them.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah.
Peridiam, who do you have by the way, that's my only double up, just so everybody knows. I wanted to represent as many seasons as I possibly could, but that one, I love Taj and Sierra. So, and I would have put Erin with 2 N's. Peridiam, who do you have at 8?
I actually have 2 double ups, although this next one, number 8, is not a double up. So I guess I'll have 8 seasons represented in total. This one actually really fits well with what you talked about with Sierra and the Tyson dynamic, because this is a player who I think whenever they're interacting with another person, whatever their storyline comes up in this season, and only for the one season that they played. The person that they're against, like that creates a very fun scene. And I think I underrate how much this player contributes to that season. And again, this is sort of a hot take. It came to me at the last minute, but I put Trish from Kageon in my
Good
top
pick.
10. And I have a list. I had to like outline why, because I think Trish doesn't win Kageon under almost any circumstances, unfortunately. Like the way it breaks out at the final 5, final 4, I think she goes either at final 5 or final 4, regardless. Like if Spencer didn't win that final 5 immunity, I think she probably gets voted out final 4 because Cass wins it. If Cass doesn't win it, like I see, like she just was not gonna win based on how the season played out with the challenges that happened. Looking back, but I was like, you know what? She does a great job at the swap with LJ and Jeffra and blindsides. She literally like
She
pushes Lindsay out of the game. She just forces a woman to quit because she's so mad. And I'm like, that is ridiculous. That's like one of the only times I think in history of the show somebody just rage quits the show because of Trish. Trish is the key reason that Cass flips because of she offers up Sarah on a silver platter. And Tony and LJ accidentally play idols on each other because they don't have enough information. It's Trish who says, look, we'll give you what you want to do. And because of that, Cass, I mean, it ultimately turns into a huge rivalry down the line, which is another thing that I love about Trish is that she doesn't really hold back. But there's
Always
like a lot of
rival. And
she brings Jeffra back in after Tony blindsides them both. And that's sort of like the flaw in her is that I think she gets too close. She's like, Tony is like the Russell and she's like the Parvy or something. That's like not the best example, but Tony is too big for her to put in a cage and carry to the end with and possibly win against. But without Trish, I don't think Tony's game does as well as it does in Kageon. She does what she says she does in her final tribal council speech, which she puts out a lot of little fires for Tony, reins people back in for him that he was not doing himself. And it allows him to become one of the best players in the history of Survivor. You need good allies to win, and I think Trish is a great ally to have. And I would love to see her come back. I think that she gives arguably the first or second best final tribal council performance from a juror perspective with her speech to Tony. It is so heartfelt. I love it. So I was like, you know what? I think I'll give her some dues here. She's definitely a forgotten player. Not too far. Only been 12 seasons so far, but I don't see her coming back ever.
I think she probably won't come back. I think there's two, like, I think Cass would come back again. I think as much as that season is incredibly popular and now, you know, has the king of Survivor, I think her time, even though it's only 12 seasons, I feel like there are other quote unquote Trishes that Survivor will end up going with before her. But I would really like them to bring her back in because I think she has a crazy good personality and she's really entertaining and also really kept Tony in line.
And she plays off so many people so well, and she gets people so riled up that it makes for great television. Like her rivalry with Lindsay, her rivalry with Cass, with her relationship with Tony. She works. She works in the season in the background and keeps those gears going.
She's the reason Sarah goes home, but then also like you bring up a good point. I think people forget with Kageon because they're overshadowed by Spencer and Tony and Cass and even Woo's decision at the end and Tasha. She's just overshadowed. Yeah. And that laugh literally made a woman quit Survivor. That laugh. And that laugh throughout the game gets more attention than why LJ was on the beauty tribe. I mean, because I still don't understand that, but it's so
her beautiful
funny.
Soul.
It was his soul. That's what he said. Yeah, that's true. But it's so funny how much attention is just brought to like that part of Trish. And I think Trish is somebody you really want on your side. But if you don't have her on your side, you're just like, oh my God, leave me alone, because we see that happen throughout the entire season. And yeah, it's funny that on a season so popular, somebody as good of a character as Trish could become forgotten. You know, if she was on Nicaragua, she would be the shining star of the season, but she's on Kageon, and that, you know, it speaks volumes for why Kageon's such a great season when she might be the 8th or 7th or 6th best player or best personality on that season. But on any other season, she could have easily been number 1 or 2.
Yeah, I just think she's such a huge contributor that is quite underrated as far as her character and her gameplay. And like, yeah, I think Kaiyan might have one of the best, possibly the best final six in the history of the show. And she's probably like the weakest of that six from both the character and a game perspective. Maybe not. Maybe, I don't know about
probably.
Tosh.
I would say Wu probably.
Wu
Or
gameplay
Todd.
wise, but I love Wu. I'm like a huge
Okay.
Wu stan. I like Wu.
Interesting.
So like I thought Wu was gonna win at the time, and I was actually like kind of happy. I was like, oh, this is awesome. Wu's such like I'm a big fan of like characters that kind of bumble around who don't know what they're doing, like Fabio or something. So for me, like I liked Wu a lot. But yeah, no, it's just Trish sort of falls between the cracks of Kaiyan, and yeah, I think it's just she's just a little too forgotten.
Yeah.
So
Alexa, who's your 8?
So I'm gonna double up now because I put 2 players on here who I think now probably don't so much belong, or at least one of them does. My number 8, I have Albert from South Pacific. He has made a resurgence in terms of just like presence, and I think that's obviously coupled with Sophie being called back for Winners at War. But as much as I think, in terms of likelihood to return, as much as Sophie had a bit of a renaissance, I think more people are clamoring and just saying, well, I want to see Sophie a third time. I don't think anyone's saying, oh my gosh, well, now I have to see Albert play again. So I think Albert still doesn't have much of, if any, chance to come back. However, I think he's really shown that he is not kind of the bumbling around player who we saw in South Pacific. I think with him, we saw, okay, he's a part of this majority alliance. He keeps saying he's going to do something big, and then it doesn't happen, and then ends up kind of being the laughingstock of the final tribal council. But you see that he's a really smart player, and he understands the game, and obviously he has a lot of hindsight to work with. But I think he's someone who, if given a second chance, or if he wasn't on perhaps a captain season where it was the right thing to do to follow your captain, then I think we would have seen, a much more interesting season and a much more interesting player.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think Albert's kind of like the war dog that could win. Because I don't think War Dog would come back and really change his game much. I think War Dog still would come out, be a big personality. And I think ultimately, like, somewhere along the line, he would just be too big for himself. Where Albert, I feel like, was a small personality on that season. He was. And I do think that like that can translate a little bit better to actually coming back and playing again. And Alexander Hitch says, give me Cowboy, playing Voodoo. I wish, man. I said no pre-merge because again, I could have really gotten lost. But that's what I feel about Albert.
Yeah, with Albert, I think he was probably, I don't want to say like ahead of his time, but he just got unfortunately played in a season that was very simple as far as the gameplay goes. It was just the boring Onion Alliance type strategy where you have this big tribe of 6, 7, and then they have like a 4 and then a 2 or a 3 in the middle. And like it didn't give Albert any room to do what he was hoping to do. I feel bad for him. Like I felt like he was sort of boxed in, and he would have loved to have more of a new school running around the island, kind of flipping people and going and joining little coalitions here and there. I would love to see him come back. I didn't put him in my top 10, but I think he's a good pick. And I was like, oh, Albert, can I squeeze him in here somewhere when you said his name? But yeah, it's a good pick.
It's tough. I mean, it's tough. And I agree with you. The problem with Albert was the second he stepped foot on South Pacific, he couldn't win. If he steps foot on Philippines, he could have won, because it's a different type of season. There's a little bit more chaos going on. He was on the wrong captain season. He was on the follow Ozzy, follow coach, they are so great season, rather than the, Penner really isn't as useful as we think he is. And we don't really like scooping. And Russell Swan is the worst challenge performer on our season. So like, it's funny. He was just on the wrong one.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Alexa, you said you're doubling up. Who's your 7?
Oh, yeah. So my number 7 is Kenny from Gabon, another player who probably does have more of a chance than I'm giving him. But he's sort of similar to Marty in that he's kind of a villain. I think he's more of a villain than Marty is. But Gabon is a season that people either love or they hate. I have a general feeling that Jeff himself is not the biggest Gabon fan. Just considering that, Corinne was our main returnee. But, I think Kenny is someone who showed that he was a really good player and showed that he had no problem playing hard. I know he's not forgotten, people in the comments, but I think generally, like, again, I show this list to anybody other than people who listen to this podcast, and they're like, I don't know who that person is. But he's someone who on that season, he made you feel something. I did not like Kenny, but then going back and watching Gabon, I get his appeal, and he plays really hard, and he doesn't really take any prisoners. So not so much forgotten. So I think he doesn't really belong on the list, but I thought he was a good one to mention.
I mean, I think he might be more forgotten maybe in the eyes of like the producers or something.
Yeah.
Because he's definitely a recurring name I see. I put him on my second chance too. Like I would love to see Kenny come back. I love the whole gamer archetype that he just doesn't show up ever. I think he was like ahead of his time in some level, and he got placed in a cast full of kind of just strategic dodos. And he kind of unfortunately overplays at the end. I didn't put him in my top 10 also, only because there's a couple things that set him back for me in the end game that made me like question his some of this. Like on some level, I'm like, he played with some really weak players, but almost like, but there's something to losing to really weak players that makes me think, how much credit should I give him? So I don't know. I'd love to see him come back.
I think he could play again, and that's why I didn't include him, because I love Kenny.
Yeah.
And I actually think I agree with you on the whole weak players thing, but when you come out there and you're Kenny, you have no business getting as far as you do, because this was still in kind of that age of like, yes, we had seen Suri make it very far. We had seen that happen, but we had not quite hit the point yet of get rid of the big, strong guys before the merge that they can't do anything at the merge. Like we hadn't hit that point of like, oh, maybe we keep around the GOAT from day one. And so Kenny coming out there, like he could have easily been the first boot, and he could have easily been the second boot, but he did a good job of like, even when his closest ally went home first, of like getting in with the tribe, starting to work with people. And Crystal very nearly made my list and just missed it, because Crystal is just him and Crystal are a great odd couple. Like they are so much fun. And the thing is, what I think makes people not like Gabon, and what I love about Gabon, is that everybody's a villain. To me, like, you talk about Game of Thrones, Jon Snow and Daenerys, I don't care. But you give me like Cersei and Littlefinger and Varys, like they're all bad guys. That's what I want to watch. And like, I just think there's a more interesting dynamic to that, because when you're watching Survivor Gabon, you're like, I don't know how this is going to happen. I don't know who I want to win, but man, like I wouldn't be mad if one of these people got eaten by a crocodile. Like I wouldn't be mad about it. And so it's very fun to watch from that aspect of it, especially when you have Randy, who is an absolute troll under a bridge on this season, getting screamed at by Crystal, who's an absolute troll under a bridge on this season. Like that to me is fun. And Kenny, I think, could play again. I don't think Crystal ever will, especially after like the whole doping scandal and stuff. But Crystal's great. I mean, Crystal and Kenny, I think, are super entertaining. And, two of the people I'd like to see back from Gabon, but everybody get ready for when I actually get to my higher up on this list of who should be returning from Survivor Gabon, you crazy, crazy people. So that's what I got.
Susie,
of course.
Obviously.
Of course. Susie. Oh my God. That scene where Randy pretty much tells her to shut the F up is still one of the most cringy scenes in the history of Survivor. And it's so damn entertaining.
All right, guys, who's up?
Pretty, why don't you go?
Go number 7.
Yeah.
Okay. For my number 7, this is where I did start doubling up with one of the seasons. And I felt like it's only right if I included Greg. I also put Ian. And this is the thing. I don't think Ian will come back. That's why I ultimately put him on the list. This is the difference where, like, okay, on one hand, how good of a player were they? On the other hand, how likely are they to ever come back? I think Ian was a good player. I don't think he's probably ever going to come back. I think that he's more of just like a wish list that we'll never see. Unfortunately, I just think he's too far removed. He seems to be I've seen him on social media. He seems to be enjoying himself doing what he's doing. I don't think he has any reason to, unfortunately. I really liked Ian. But I think that there's like the testament for his good game. I think he works in tandem with Tom, who plays one of the best games ever. The fact that he was in a 12-hour endurance competition, and it's like on any other season being in a 12-hour endurance competition, like that's enough. He just won like 5 endurance competitions in one. He just happened to be against Tom, who was willing to compete with him for 12 hours, but like he could hold out for longer against lots of other players and beat them on other endurance competitions if it comes to that. And it shows that to me, like he really wanted to win. He had the will to win. And even though he throws his game away at the final 3, when if he didn't, and he happens to win that final competition, he wins the whole season. It shows me like, yes, he threw it, and some people say that's one of the dumbest moves ever. I don't think it's one of the dumbest moves because it really wasn't a move. The intent was to lose, so he lost.
Yeah.
It's like
It
it's,
worked.
it's like
Win, yeah.
purposefully throwing. You're playing a board game. You purposefully choose to lose the game. People say that's a dumb move. Well, yeah, of course. Like that's the point. He wasn't thinking he was going to win anyway. So I think he plays a good game up until that one move at the last 99 percentile, and he's not totally forgotten, but I don't think we'll ever see him again. So fits my criteria.
And he kind of missed my criteria just a little bit because like I really went for people like who is nobody asking for to come back. And like I still feel like when we do these types of second chance podcasts and things like that, most of the community really wants Ian to come back. And so that's kind of why he just missed for me. Whereas I think that there's other players who should get the same kind of clamoring for like, come on, bring them back, who just aren't getting it, you know? And that's ultimately the other four men I chose are people who I'm like, why does anybody ever ask for these guys to come back? Like what's wrong with them? Although one of them might be 80 years old. So that could be what's wrong with them. But speaking of 80-year-olds, my number 7, anybody want to take a guess on who they think my 80-year-old is?
It's not BB Anderson, is it?
It is not BB Anderson. No,
Is it Joe? From
Joe? No, it is not Joe. I actually had to think about that. I was like, Joe Anglim, is he 80?
Looks great.
Not Joe.
80?
No.
Is this person actually 80?
Yeah, is this number correct?
High 70s for sure.
Because that means that they were older.
Man or a woman?
Must be an older player. It's an older male, probably. Okay, so they played pre-19.
Big Tom?
No, but he played
No,
more than one.
well, it's more than one ones.
By the way, while you're all thinking about
is
this,
it Pasco?
It is Pappy.
And that's because of JBP in the comments said it.
Oh, did he say it? Yeah, it is. It's Pappy. There you go. You
got it. Who got it? No, Rennie got it. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, we have a couple people. Okay, I'm turning the comments off so that nobody can guess my guessing games anymore. I want to ruin this. I wanted to make this whole next hour just about you guys trying to figure out who Pascal was. And then we just rushed through our last 6 picks each. I got so much shit for putting Pascal high on my top 100 players list. He was not only
number 27.
No. He was at 50 something. He was at 50, but he was at 50 something, which is high. And a lot of people are like, that's crazy. And I'm like, go watch Marquesas. If that guy doesn't pull the purple rock, he wins Survivor Marquesas. He does. He wins Survivor Marquesas. He did not ever get a vote the entire season, and he was the oldest man out there. You know what happened in every other season before that? The oldest person went home. It's okay, Roger Bingham doesn't go home, but Roger Bingham also had Elizabeth Hasselbeck literally just being like, you're so cute, come be my buddy. Where, you know, in the other seasons, though, Kim Johnson gets all the way to final 2, but she's being dragged. Pascal's not being dragged. Like him and Nalia very much have a similar game as they're going through, and they are on an even playing field as far as I'm concerned. And yes, Kathy Vavrick O'Brien, actually somebody that I considered for putting on this, even though we said one-time players only, because Kathy Vavrick O'Brien and Amy Cusack have been forgotten despite the fact that they've played twice. I do believe that Pascal English is arguably the most underrated player in the history of the game. And people forget that if it was not for the Purple Rock, he is probably your winner of Survivor Marquesas.
Assuming, of course, V doesn't win the final immunity. She would take Nalia.
She would take that's a good
although
point.
She might not take would she take Kathy if it was the 3 of them though?
Yeah, because so let's say I mean Pascal was never going to flip, and obviously that's an error in his way, is that he would never flip on somebody, but
it's a small thing.
And it was season 4. But I do think, but there could be an argument that if it is Vesepia, Kathy, and Pascal, Vesepia might take Pascal and think she has a better shot. Or if she takes Kathy,
more of the like growth story.
Kathy Vavrick O'Brien's our winner of that season. So I just think like what Pascal's able to do, he is the tipping point ultimately in what gets rid of John Carroll. He's the last one they have to convince, and he really does come to terms with it. The fact that he's on that tribe with the women and they end up winning one of those challenges and he's getting along so well with all of them there. Like he had a great social game. I love his and Sean's story together. I think it's phenomenal. I think it really works. And yeah, I mean, I think people forget that he exists except for when he came up for whatever he did as a judge. That was weird. But you know, he had kind of vanished from the face of the earth. And at the time, it was like, please let it be him or Kathy. That's who everybody was rooting for on that season, because nobody really could get behind Sean and V because they were still bitter that Hunter and Gina had gone home early. Like, people were bitter that entire season as it was going on. And so they didn't like, Sean is now obviously one of the biggest fan favorites ever. And I think that happened pretty quickly after that season. But I still think at the time, people were a little annoyed. Like, why did you vote out your strongest members? Why did you side with Sarah? All of that stuff. Whereas Pascal, like, everybody was just on board with him from the beginning. And it's funny to me that after All Stars happened, like, I don't think somebody said Pascal's name for the rest of the history of the show. I want to bring him back into the fold, and that's why I have him as my 7.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I didn't have him.
Disagrees heavily. Yeah,
we got a lot of different takes.
I would. He's not in my most underrated players list.
Yeah, not for me either. I'm with Alexa.
Wow, you guys, I'll tell you what.
Yeah, and Haven and Aaliyah are interesting together. Yeah, I've never been wild about him, so I'm sorry.
That's fine. Hey, you know what? Only one person out of 3 can be right, and it's me. Who do we have? Yeah. Trust me. I mean, I've gotten in arguments with Adam Jumbo over this list. Russell's producer of that show. I mean, he just yelled at me. He'd be like, I'm pretty sure he rigged the thing so that my people wouldn't make it onto the list.
Adam did?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure. He also said Troyzan wasn't on Corey Conway's list, and Troyzan was on Corey Conway's list. So how does Troyzan end up at number 100? But that's a side factor.
The audacity.
The audacity. God. I know, right? Number 6, do you guys want me to go again so I don't talk about Pascal so you guys can get a different taste in your mouth, or do one of you want to go because I don't deserve to talk?
Give us a palate cleanser.
All right. I'm going Twyla Tanner from Survivor Vanuatu. And
she is also on my list.
Okay, but I'm glad she's on yours, Alexa, because it does not seem like Peridiam agrees.
Yeah, there was an oof.
Oh, no. It's because I was very on the fence about putting her in my top 10, and she is for sure an honorable mention. I had her also on my second chance to wish list. That was one of the last Survivor videos I made, so it's very fresh in my mind. Like, I was like, if they're going to be exploring future seasons ideas before Survivor cuts off, Winners at War is over, and we have no future in the near, we have no season in the near future. I need to make a video that gets like the views and the attention that pops up on the algorithm for like the producers to be like, look, second chance too, guys. And I put Twyla on the list as like somebody I would love to see come back, because she is obviously in the casuals eye incredibly underrated. Like, she plays a good game, not a great game in my opinion. I decided not to put her in my top 10 for that reason, but I would love to see her come back. I think she's a really unique casting choice. I said that my reaction was just I was thinking about her a lot going into this podcast.
Yeah, she's just I mean, it's like that final 2 could be one of the best final 2s ever. And nobody talks about either of the people in that final 2. Like, I feel bad for Twyla and Chris because it's almost like they were interesting at the time. Like you said, interesting casting choices. But they kind of like, because they're so unique and we really haven't seen people similar. I mean, I guess Jane is like the most similar thing to Twyla. I'm sorry, Twyla. I don't mean that. But I guess they're like the most similar. You know, it's kind of like that country woman who's going to do it herself and hardworking, whatever. And I guess because there's Chris and Twyla are so unique, it actually knocks them down in people's minds. And that's why I think they don't get talked about as much, because like, it's not an archetype we're used to seeing. And I think that I think Twyla's a great character. I think she's a good player. I agree with you. I don't think she's a great player, but I do think that she's just such a great character, and she makes it so far in the game by being Twyla. And like the fact that she's the last woman standing after how that all started off on that tribe. I don't know. I think she's super underrated. And I mean, I think like if I were to say to my mom or dad, what do you like about Twyla? They'd say, I don't know what you're talking about. And I'd be like, Tanner from Survivor Vanuatu. They'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, stop, leave us alone. You know? And
with Twyla, you get the really good combination of someone she's playing really hard, and she's not the kind of person to be like, oh, I'm sorry, I voted you out. Like, her feud with Eliza, or her rivalry with Eliza, is fantastic. But at the same time, like, her getting just completely roasted for swearing on her son, when now that is beyond acceptable, is really a huge turning point in Survivor, because then she gets to the final tribal and it's just like, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean any wrongdoing. And, you know, I think that's a huge reason why Chris, kind of blows it out. So I think she has that really good combo of being cutthroat on the outside, but being a huge softie on the inside.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm trying to see
Absolutely.
if I put that episode in my top 5, the one where she swears on her son. I think it's like the final 7 blindside of Vanuatu. I don't think I did. I can't believe I didn't. I love that. That's one of my favorite moves and favorite blindsides in the history of the show. So
that's funny because Alexa and I we did a Patreon bracket, and our patrons put up like their 32 best episodes, and we did a bracket where we did it based on criteria, and that was one of the last episodes we had remaining. I think it made it to like our final 8 or something along those lines. It's a great episode, and Eliza versus the Eliza and Twyla teaming up there to get rid of Leanne. And Leanne was somebody who's an honorable mention for me because I think Leanne was a very good character who gets completely forgotten because Amy did get more credit than Leanne, and Amy comes back and plays. And I just said it, Amy Cusack is a 2-time player who could be on this list because she is just forgotten at this point. So, Leanne and her kind of fit in that same boat. But in my book, Twyla just gets a little bit of an edge. She made it further. I think she made a couple bigger moves, and one of the most unique players to ever play the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Peridiam, who do you have at 6?
All right. This is one that I think a lot of people hear about, and I don't think it's not a surprise for me. Like, I'm like, yeah, I think this person probably is on this list. I also feel strongly about the fact that they're not going to come back. This was Rodney from Worlds Apart. I don't think Rodney's going to come back. I think postseason he's been hot and cold with his antics. He's done good, but he's also kind of like he's a little out there. Mm-hmm. I don't think he's going to come back and play, even though I have asked for him in the past to come back on these wish lists. I think Rodney plays not so great at the beginning, but he picks up steam. And I think by the end, if it isn't for Mike's runaway immunity train, I think he's possibly the winner. Yeah. He had such a great amount of you read between the lines of the editing and the behind the scenes and the Ponderosa, and you'll see that Rodney had a lot of people won over. The edit tells a different story. They make him out to be, and he is very whiny, but they really highlight that part of his personality because he loses. I think that you see a lot of Rodney's doing his impressions. They're funny. He's got a good sense of humor. He manages to make that group of people love him. Whether or not the fans love him is a different story. I think he's not the most digestible player. People aren't going to like him that much, and I don't think a lot of people are asking for him back per se. But I do think that he plays a pretty good game. Mike one-ups him up until the merge. Rodney creates a secret alliance within the big alliance. And if it wasn't for Mike winning out, which is an anomaly in the history of this show, it's never really been done before, winning all the immunity challenges. I do think Rodney stands a good chance of being the winner. So for that reason, I think he's not going to come back, and I think he's a pretty good player. I put him on my list. Yeah,
I agree. And Will was a huge Rodney defender when I used to do this podcast with Will. He would always say Rodney could have won that game and Rodney should have won that game. And I think Rodney beats Mama C, and people think that that's a very cold take. And I'm like, Rodney was really well liked by the people on that jury. He was really well liked by a good majority. Maybe not the no callers and maybe not Shireen or whatever, because that's who Mike ultimately does end up winning with. But they might have split, between Rodney and Mama C. And I think Rodney would have pulled it out with the blue collars. I mean, you forget how much everybody liked his Mike impersonation. So I don't have Rodney on here because I still don't understand why he has never been asked to play again or why he hasn't played again. I still think that he should play again, so I don't have him on here, but I do like that pick.
There also haven't been a ton of opportunities because he's not going to be on Game Changers, or I guess he could have been on Game Changers. I think anybody could have been on that season, but I bet he still has some chance, but maybe not due to outside of game.
I don't think he's ever coming back.
Yeah, That's a good point. Alexa, who's your 6?
This is my latest player. I had Sydney from Survivor Co. Wrong. I think she has said that she would actively not come back, but I think she's another player who, makes it to the final 4, has this huge emotional exit, and then it gets completely overshadowed by the Aubrey versus Michelle debate. But Sydney is a huge part of that season. She's a huge part of conflict early on and continued conflict with Scott and Jason, and then ends up in a pretty good position to potentially win. And I think she's someone who obviously like she's a bodybuilder, so like from a challenge perspective and like the character perspective, there's already that. And then she has a good story too. So I think she has a really good, trio of, making for a good Survivor player, but I don't think there's any chance of her coming back.
I love the Sydney pick. Sydney and Jacqueline were two of the women that I had really close to being on here and didn't end up putting on. I think Jacqueline Schultz is super underrated, but I also think Sydney, people kind of forget it. She gets lost in the Michelle versus Aubrey argument, the fact that Ty's a huge fan favorite, and the fact that Jason and Scott are so vicious. Sydney is in the middle of all that the entire season.
Right.
And she just kind of gets lost. And yeah, it doesn't seem like she'd ever play again. Maybe it's because I like Sydney, and because Alexa, you and I talk about Michelle so much because I'm obnoxious that we see Sydney's name more. So I actually feel like maybe she's not as forgotten, which maybe. Had me off, but I was close to putting her on here.
I was too. I had her as an honorable mention. I do think obviously she's very overshadowed compared to the whole Michelle Aubrey debate. She plays a very instrumental game. She really turns the tide at the merge. I think she's the main proponent of getting the guys out at the beginning with Nick. I think she's the one who turns it on Nick, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I think she's a good player, underrated, underreported. I know she doesn't want to come back. So again, she fits this list because I doubt she will, but I would love to see her come back. I think she would be a great pick for second chance too, especially given like we have seen Aubrey come back twice. We've seen Michelle come back. I think that the trio of those three that season between the Brain, Brawn, and Beauty, and the fact that we haven't seen the Brawn come back of those three who could win. I don't think she probably wins that season wrong if she makes the final three, just based on postseason, seeing how bitter they were. But nonetheless, I think she has the potential to do a lot of damage. So it's a shame. It's a shame she doesn't want to come back. I think that's the biggest thing.
That is a bummer.
It is what it is, Yeah.
All right, we're halfway through these things. Who I guess I can go 5. I have the landscaper from Michigan. Where is he from? Michigan? Is that where he's
Lansing? I think he's from Lansing, Michigan.
Is that where he says he's from? But he's not
so.
actually from Lansing, Michigan. Peridiam, do you know who I'm talking about?
Are you talking about Hawking Corporation?
I am talking about Gary Hawkins / Hogaboom. Look, I'm on my old guy tear here. I got Gary, I got Pascal as my last two picks, my last 2 male picks here. But I think Gary Hogaboom, it's Guatemala's whole season. You can put the entire cast on here. Rafe, Judd, Cindy, another one that like people don't really think about, but was actually a pretty good player. And I love the fact that she kept the damn car because she was going to get voted out no matter what. Jamie Newton, Brandon, I think a very underrated character. I could have went Brian and Amy, which was part of the reason why I was like, I cannot do pre-merge because this is just too much. But Gary does so well compared to what he should have done on this season. And I do feel like, this wasn't an era. I mean, he played right after Tom Westman. He plays right before Terry Dietz. Like, this wasn't an era where this kind of player was a really popular player. And it's interesting to me. I mean, if Terry Dietz hadn't played again in, gotten half of a second chance and second chances, he would have been on this list, no doubt about it. But, the fact that Gary was never even really in the discussion for all of that surprises me. He's the first player in the history of the show to ever play an immunity idol. He finds it on his own. The confessionals while he's doing that are hilarious. He's aligned with Danny. He's Danny's last ally before Danny goes on to win the entire game. And I just find it interesting that he never gets discussed. And I think he's a really good Survivor player who unfortunately played in a season with captains, and when you have a season with captains, those seasons tend to go along tribal lines more than other types of seasons. And his Yasha, I think he was on Yasha. I don't think it was Nakum. I think he was Yasha. I think he started on Nakum and then went to Yasha, whatever it was. Yeah, he never really had a chance because they came into the merge down 6-4. And the fact that he still was able to kind of navigate that, get Bobby John to go before him, get Jamie to go before him, make it all the way to Final 7. And he's the first player in the history of the show to have to really lie about who he was. And that cannot go understated. That totally changed the game of Survivor. Because think about that. After that, you start to see people lying about what their jobs are, what they do. You start to see more famous people start to play because it opened the door for that type of thing. And even though Danny recognized him right away, it didn't blow up his game. So I think Gary is a incredibly underrated player, which I am sure people don't necessarily agree with, but he is so forgotten. And again, at the time, he was a big rooting interest because nobody was really rooting for Stephanie Stride because they were the villains of that season. Like Stephanie and Judd, they were the villains. They were. And people wanted Gary to succeed. And that idol play, I will never forget watching that because that blew my mind. That blew my 14-year-old mind or however old I was when that episode aired. But I remember just being like, wow, this is going to change the game for the better. And boy, was I wrong. But it was cool.
Do you think are you what side of the camp do you fall on as far as Gary being the first person to find an idol without a clue? Because I see that come up, and Russell claims that's his fame thing. He found the idol without the clue, but I see a lot of people say no. Gary technically did because he didn't have the clue.
Yeah,
he got the wrong.
Technically, he did. I don't think he. I guess the difference is this is kind of like a splitting hair thing. Gary did it first. Russell was the one. Russell thought to do that.
Right. I think Russell paved the way for because Gary didn't. That was season 11. Like, and nobody. I don't see anyone referencing Gary Ogumim's strategy of finding the idols without the clues. But yeah, I think that was a really. I think that's an interesting pick. I didn't have Gary on my list, but I like it.
Yeah, and I also think like Russell without the clues and stuff. It's 8 seasons later. I mean, now idols are in every season. Idols are starting to have an impact. Like Gary finding that thing that is this big and gray and looks like a rock in the middle of a forest that is gray and looks like it has a lot of rocks. I mean, it's pretty damn awesome.
Right.
And I guess his clue is that Judd was a fool. Yeah, Judd was a fool saying
he found it up in these trees. Yeah,
it's so crazy. Funny. I know, Judd, man. That was so Gary did have a clue. He had just do what Judd is doing. So yeah, Gary's my guy. I love Gary. Very underrated player.
I didn't realize, is he the first? I guess he is the first to lie about his profession.
Yeah.
Because that's such a common trope thing you see on these shows and Survivor and Big Brother. People walk in and they immediately start lying. They say they're like an elementary school teacher or something. And they're like a sports athlete or something random. Or if they're a cop, they lie about whatever like Tony did. So I didn't think about that.
Brian Heidick had lied a little bit, but he was technically a car insurance salesman. But like Gary had to lie about like his persona. Like his whole identity. Yeah, he had to lie about it. Like Danny called him out right away. And he says, I was a landscaper at the time. Like I wasn't lying about that. But he really was because, you know, he's on the show because he's an ex-football player, not because he's a landscaper. And he was on America's team. Even if he's not the most famous quarterback, even if he's not one of the 10 most famous quarterbacks from America's team. If you're on America's team, there's a good chance you're going to be recognized when you get there on the show.
Yeah, I didn't. I was just looking that up. Like, yeah, he played for the Cowboys. Okay, I was like, did he play for the Chiefs? Because that would be ridiculously
yeah, that would be unfair. Yeah. Then they did that on purpose. And congrats, Danny. That's why.
Right. Then I'm like, and it's not as impressive. But yeah, it's good to know.
Right.
Peridiam, who's your 5?
Okay, I'm like, this is like my top 10 hot take list at this point. Not so much. Rodney and Ian, maybe not so much. Number 5, I have a player who I think is underrated, and he gets a really bad edit, especially toward the end of the season. And I think that in some alternate reality, if the rules were different on the season, he is the winner. And I'll explain why. I picked Chase Rice from Survivor Nicaragua. The fact that Chase loses because 2 quitters gave the other player the win, to me, has always felt like one of the strangest finale winning. I love Fabio. He's like a top 10 favorite character of mine. Like him and Wu are like the 2 weirdos that I always like. But like, and I never have been a big fan of Chase. I think his end game is questionable with his reward picks, but the fact that like every step of the way he's in the majority, he's never alpha enough, I guess you could say, to command to the alliance and lead the direction. And I do wonder what his strategy was before the quit going into the end game, because once Nyanka and Purple Kelly do quit, he does get into that good 4-person alliance. I do think that he probably beats Holly in the final 3 just based on postseason information. I don't think Sash stood any chance. So it really just came down to Fabio winning 3 straight immunities that cost Chase the win, as well as 2 quitters giving their votes to Fabio. On any other season after that, those 2 quitters aren't on the jury. I don't think that was the rule that they established.
No, they established it right at the reunion there. Jeff established that.
Yeah. So like he lost 5-4, but 2 of those votes for Fabio were from Nyanka and Purple Kelly. So for me, I'm like, a lot of the data a lot of what I'm looking at on paper shows me that Chase probably could have won, and he maybe in some cases should have won. I think that he plays a decent game. He's never obviously coming back. He's one of those. He's way bigger at this point of a person with his his musical career. So I know like most people are gonna be like, Chase, okay. But I'm sort of the same way. I just think I think Chase had enough in him to be a forgotten player who will never come back, but he played a good, if not possibly great game that just happened to have a few wonky things throw him off and ultimately cost him the game when it's like Fabio winning 3 immunities at the end and 2 quitters voting for the other person. I don't know.
It's interesting. It's an interesting perspective on that for sure. Cause I never really thought about the 2 quitters are really what gave Fabio the win. I never really thought about that.
Yeah.
Right. And I think Chase, like you said, like Chase didn't play a great game. And if he ends up winning, it would be really interesting to see how people would react to that, because I think no one's like a huge Chase fan because like you said, he has a pretty tough
Survivor career, at least.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. He has a pretty tough stumble to the finish, but at the same time, he ends up losing to Fabio, who's incredibly popular. So I get that. I think that's a good pick.
The editing at the end of the season really throws Chase and Sash onto the bus. I think to make Fabio more palatable, whatever the word is, they make him easier to root for. I'm so hyper aware of the editing and the manipulation that the producers love to push upon us as the narrative that they want to sell us. So I see Chase and I'm like, I do feel a little bit bad because I think if he did end up winning, a lot of his moves that were questionable would probably be swept under the rug. But because he lost, and they're trying to explain to us how this guy lost, who was in the majority the entire season, who was in the dominant alliance the entire season, who was calling shots here and there, who really could have won. He almost won. Like, how does he lose? So they show us why, and people lose respect for him. And I get, I was in the same camp, and I still am on some level. So, but I put him up top 10.
Yeah, I like it. And I think Chase is an interesting choice there. He personally didn't fit my criteria, considering he has like millions of admiring fans. So he didn't quite fit my criteria for like forgotten, considering after Survivor he went on to be like one of the most famous country artists out there. So that kind of dropped him off my possibilities here. But yeah, the end of Nicaragua is sketchy as hell. And we all know it, and everybody knows it. And it's just from Final 6 on, that season is just very sketchy. After the quits, there's so many things that go down.
It's a scuffed end game of Survivor.
Absolutely.
Between that and everything we saw in the hushed whispers in the background.
Yeah, it's Jane one fan favorite for a reason. Let's just put it that way.
Yep.
Alexa, who's your number 5?
My number 5, I have Hayden Moss from Survivor Blood versus Water. Maybe shouldn't count because he did win a certain other reality TV show, but
Big Brother,
I don't think
great season.
Exactly. Love Big Brother.
You guys should watch Big Brother. We'll watch it together.
Yeah, maybe that would make us like it, or just Phil, just say no.
No.
I don't think Hayden will come back. I think he could, but I think his time has kind of passed. But if that rock draw goes his way, I think he wins the game, no question. And I think, he's overshadowed by Tyson, but I also maybe this is a bad take. I don't think Tyson's winning game is like anything that's particularly incredible. And I think Hayden's really the standout character and player on that season. Especially considering that he isn't one of the returnees, but it makes sense because he ends up winning a different strategy game.
Yeah, and it's another point to kind of like my Sierra made Tyson, Hayden made Sierra, the other Sierra. Like he was a very big impact on Sierra Easton becoming as popular as she was, because like Hayden and her really do have like a weird relationship the entire season. Obviously the mom vote and all of that, but Hayden and her do have a really weird relationship as that season goes on. And I think like being able to get her to do the rock draw and all of that, like obviously it goes down in history, and then big moves with a Z, of course, that just keeps going. But I don't know. Like I like Hayden a lot. Personally, I can never forget him, which is why I didn't put him on this list, because I feel like I'm always like, Hayden should play again. So
I had heard rumors that if it wasn't Winners at War, Hayden was on the potential shortlist to come back before the theme was changed. That's what I had heard. So I didn't include him on my top 10 for that reason. Like, he's probably still in the mix. I think he also was in the mix for this current the season of Big Brother All-Stars that just finished. They didn't bring him back, but I had strongly heard leading up to the premiere date 3 months ago, Hayden was one of the like 3 people that was swapped out at the last second to be on the season. And he got swapped out for his like one of his closest allies who did get on the season from his winning season of Big Brother. So for me, like, yeah, he's not a forgotten player by any means, definitely, but he's plays a very good game. His rock draws is so infamous. I think it's one of the biggest moments you look back on top of obviously Sierra voting at her mom right before that. Yeah. And I personally will say, like, I watched Hayden play live 24/7. That was the first season I watched a Big Brother. It was Hayden winning. And so I got to see him play these social strategy games every day. And I watched it. I was like, just like, what is this show? Like, it's like basically like watching Survivor in a house 24/7. I'm like, you know what? It's not Survivor, but it's the next best thing. And Survivor's not on in the summer. I will take it. That was my like sales pitch. And so I saw Hayden play. I can vouch, like, he's very good. He's very understated in his like moment to moment gameplay. He just slightly gets beat out by Tyson at the end there, but like, yeah, rock draw switches up. Hayden's our first 2-time show winner. So
yeah, I hear you. Yeah, no, that's a good one. Peridiam, who's your 4?
Number 4. This is a fun one. I'm interested to see if you guys, I don't think you guys have this person on your top 10. And interestingly, I've seen this person be brought up. I was looking at your chat and I see somebody did bring this person up in the chat, which I was very surprised by. This person is from Survivor Vanuatu, and it is Julie Berry. And that is going to blow people's minds, I think, a little bit. It kind of blew my mind because I was like, Julie Berry. But the more I looked into it, the more I felt like what Julie does between getting in the majority alliance in the pre-swap to her basically saving the women from getting Twyla to not flip in the swap when Twyla is potentially drifting towards the guy's side. Julie manipulates Twyla, and it's all there. That's like one of the highlights of Julie's story is the ability to rein Twyla in on the post swap portion right before the merge when Twyla gets brought into a Final 4 alliance with Sarge, Chad, and Chris, and Twyla and Julie convinces Twyla that they also pitched the same deal to her, and that burns Twyla's trust with the guys and convinces her to go with the women at the merge right after in the next episode. And that ultimately gives the women the numbers. And Julie was positioned really well between Amy and Leanne to be in that final 3. And I think that depending on what happens there, we'll never know who wins that final immunity challenge between these 3 women. If it wasn't for the final 7 move, I do think that there's a decent chance Julie does win that season. And I'll say that, like, it sounds weird and crazy because I don't think most people give that much thought to Julie Berry as a decent player, as a potential winner. But I do think that she is very underreported, clearly never coming back on Survivor for obvious reasons, which is partially why I like to put her on this top 10 because of the fact that, like, why she's never coming back is incredibly unique. Having dated Jeff Probst, of course, for those who didn't know. And I just think that, I think that she was set up so well. And if it wasn't for that final 7 blunder, that really wasn't even her doing. I mean, she was actually using Chris because of the relationship she had with him at that point. And she was going to hopefully leverage that moving forward. She didn't have that after Leanne blunders it, but
he brought her hat.
Yeah. There's
I think you're right, though. I think Julie is someone who nobody talks. Everyone's like, "Oh yeah, she dated Jeff," but nobody actually talks about her as a strategic player. And I think her flipping Twyla, like you said, is a really underrated move because they have nothing.
When you presented this idea to me, this is what I loved about it, was being able to talk about players like Julie Berry, who people just don't think of. They're forgotten. They'll never come back. And I think that they played one-time really good games that nobody will ever look to them and be like, you know, like, what do I learn from Julie Berry? I would say the same thing, but I do think that on another reality, like Julie Berry, if the final 7 blunder doesn't happen, I do think that there's a decent chance there's more to talk about with her. So
sure.
And what's interesting about the final 7 of Survivor Vanuatu is you could argue every single person at that final 7 was perfectly positioned to win the game because Chris does. And then when you look at Leanne and Amy, they were set up. Eliza, she was set up. Like Scout and Twyla were set up. They all had a path to win the game. When have we ever seen that in the history of Survivor? And I think that's what makes them so fascinating. Why we've brought up Twyla today, why we've brought up Leanne today, why we've brought up Amy today, even if they're honorable mentions and not necessarily on here. And then why you're bringing up Julie, obviously we've seen Eliza play again, and I doubt anybody's chomping at the bit to see Scout play again. But they were all so well positioned, and it's a really interesting dynamic of that final 7, because any of them could have pulled it out and would have been a worthy winner. And it blows my mind that Survivor Vanuatu is not universally acclaimed. Like I mean, Alexa and I both have it in our top 5. I think Alexa in her last ranking had it number 1, and it's just like, these are the reasons why. Like a player like Julie Berry, like it on the surface, it's like, oh yeah, she was the young hot girl. It's like, no, she wasn't.
I mean, she's like a proto Parvati on some level. I think that she does it even better than Parvati on Parvati's first season. And I think that she stood a better chance to win probably than Parvati on Cook Islands. Julie stood a better chance to win Vanuatu. I think for me, what brings Vanuatu down is the pre-merge, in the sense that before the swap, it's not as exciting. The post swap, or the post swap, and really the post merge is like one of the greatest of all time. Arguably top 3 or even better. I don't know. I've seen people rank it as the best, and I wouldn't 100% disagree with that. Like, it's a really good post merge. For me, I said it's like one of my least favorite pre-merges. So yeah,
I don't know. I love the fact that I think the first episode's iconic because it showed that you could win Survivor, or you could survive in Survivor without being like physical at all. And then the Dolly boot is hilarious. I mean, the Dolly boot is just such a cluster. So yeah, once the guys start kind of get JP and John and all that, yeah, okay, I get it. But I do think that like the first 2 there, I met John P. I think it's John P. at one of Fairplay's events. That was a weird moment. That was so strange.
That's so random.
He was wearing camouflage cargo shorts, flip flops, a backwards hat, and had like the goatee that only has hair right in the middle of the chin. So weird. It was like I am actually on the set of Survivor Vanuatu. Like, that's what's happening here now. It wasn't John. It was JP. It was the guy who actually went by JP. It's so confusing because John P and then JP, but it was actually
it was John Polyak, right? He was on his like at the hot amber, at a hot amber instead of ember.
Is that him? I have to look up.
Yeah, because it was John K, who was the young guy.
That's who it was. Yeah. No, JP was like the guy who he's just one of the bros. Yeah. He was one of the bros. And then Brady going home always sucks because Brady was actually likable.
They're so interchangeable, those guys.
Oh, it's crazy.
They're all one and the same.
Thank God the Fat Five took over that season. Thank God the Fat Five took over. Yeah, okay. But thank God they took over that tribe at least. Alexa, who's your 4?
So my 4 was Taj. So we already covered. Okay, cool. Already covered my number 4.
Gotcha.
I could jump to my number 3, but you go ahead.
I'll do my 4 real quick, and then I'll give you an actual time to speak on 3, since your 4 was like 3 words. I have Burton as 4, and I just finished a Survivor Pearl Islands rewatch, so maybe there's a little recency bias here, but I'm not going to go out there and say he's a top 100 Survivor player. I know he ended up on the official like TRHS list or whatever, but I don't think that's true. He does get voted out at 14 or 15, 13, whatever it is. He gets voted out pre-merge. I think it's 13. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, and then he goes. So, he does go and all that, but man, is he entertaining in that post-merge. When he comes back, he is so fun to watch, and him and Fairplay's relationship is great. The way he manipulates Lil is really entertaining. The way he's able to kind of like pull the wool over Dara's eyes the entire season is really entertaining. And I don't know, there's something so normal about Burton, but he's a
normal dude, yeah.
But the fact that he aligned with one of the biggest villains of all time, because he knew that was really the only chance he was going to win that season was going to the end with Lil or Johnny Fairplay, because it's a villain or the other person who was voted out, and he knew that. I just think he brought an interesting element to the game. I don't think we'll ever see him again. He did kind of just pop up, but I think he just gets forgotten because he's lumped in with Lil as like, ugh, why did they ever get a second chance? And I don't think he necessarily belongs in that same category, because while Lil is a caricature, Burton is just a regular guy who like overplayed his hand, got blindsided, and then said, like, I'm not a bad guy. Like, I'm sorry, but also, like, I now need to work with Johnny Fairplay to win this entire game. It's just so that post-merge with Rupert giving up his reward for Burton and then Burton literally voting him out that same episode. Like, it's so entertaining. It's so good. So I got Burton as my number 4.
He's low-key. He's a huge challenge beast.
Yeah.
Like, people don't realize
really
that.
Good.
He's actually really good at winning those challenges at the end. If it wasn't for that final 5, I mean, he could have easily been in the final 2.
Yeah.
And he probably would have won. I didn't put him on there because he got voted out. And I was like, he came back with like a renewed vigor. And I'm like, of course you do. Like, Rick did it in Edge of Extinction. Yeah. Chris did it. Chris is almost like a more modern version of Burton. And so they look so similar to me. But they're like young, they're short, curly black hair, and they're fit, and they're just these pretty good looking guys. And they both come back at the end. Yeah. I'm like, I could see Burton being on this list, but for me getting voted out in the pre-merge does sort of knock him down a few pegs.
And again, if I was ranking this based on like, are they the best player, of the forgotten players, I don't think he would necessarily be there. But in terms of like a player who I'm surprised the community doesn't talk about more, that kind of would be interesting to watch on a second go around, I think Burton Roberts is that guy.
Yeah.
All right, Alexa, let's hear you talk now. Well, who's your number 3?
My number 3 is from the Survivor Amazon, and it is Dina Bennett.
She just missed my list.
She did. I had a feeling she'd be floating around one of your lists. She is someone who, was a huge part of the beginning of Survivor Amazon, which obviously ends up getting taken over by Rob Sesternino. But I think the two of them, had they played together a little longer, I think they would have been a really good duo. But she gets cut, at the right time in the best way. But I think she's sort of like the respected mother, but not really so much like the mom figure. Like, she's the respected leader of the women. And then once it gets to the merge, like, you actually think that she has a chance to run it and get to the finish, but then gets bamboozled by Rob.
Oh, yeah, she gets blindsided hard. I love Dina there. Dina, I mean, I can just say, like, some of my honorable mentions you guys are putting on your list. Like, Dina was right there. Sydney was right there. These were last second cuts here. And Dina, I mean, man, if Rob Sesternino wasn't so good at the game, Dina might have been the winner of Survivor Amazon.
I know. That's what happens. You get somebody who's like next level, and it just makes the other players who are good be a little less good. But I also Dina as an honorable mention.
Yeah, I think she's a fun one, Alexa. And that is a forgotten player. Like, people talk about Heidi all the time. Like, we should bring Heidi back. But Dina, she doesn't get that same attention. And I mean, you could argue that she plays a better game ultimately until she gets voted out. She wants to be in control. But exactly. Still, it's like, man, she is entertaining for sure.
Yeah, so. Dina came up in my head, and I was like, that's a good one because no one talks about her.
Yeah, absolutely. Peridiam, who's your number 3?
Okay, I'm double dipping. This is the second. I initially had Ian and Greg. I have another player who is already on a season with another player on my list, and this is another one that I think is going to fall into like it's a little questionable. I could see myself having to defend it, but I do believe it works. I picked Leanne from Vanuatu. We're doing a lot of Vanuatu talk this time,
which is fine. Very much fine.
So I put Leanne as number 3 because little did I know, this is something that only really like a super fan who's paying attention beyond what we're given. Leanne was really the orchestrator of the alliance. Amy was definitely at the forefront, and she was probably the second in command, but we always believed that it was Amy who ran the whole thing. I do know that Leanne was mostly the top. She was the biggest strategist of those women. The editing didn't show us much of it. I think partially because Amy had the bigger story, the better story, and she probably just popped more on the show. But Leanne, to me, up until that final 7, I think she was the winner of that season, especially when I look back at how everything was breaking down. Julie was probably my second pick to win, followed by Amy. The problem was that final 7 episode where Leanne just totally fumbles that ball, and she tells Scout she just replaces Scout so brazenly. Scout, gets Twyla gets Chris gets Eliza. It's a fantastic domino effect that starts with Leanne screwing up. But up until the final 7, Leanne is, I think, the front runner to win that season. I think she probably does win if she's in that. If it doesn't go that way, they vote out Chris, they vote out anyone but Eliza. If they kept Eliza if she kept her under her wing, I think you're looking at Leanne likely the winner of Vanuatu. Like it's likely Leanne or Chris. But that's an underreported story that most people wouldn't be paying attention to and wouldn't know about. And I would go the same way. I said it at the beginning, an earlier version of me would disagree with me a lot with my current list. But knowing what I know now, I think that Leanne is definitely somebody to consider, who is not coming back. Like Amy came back over her. Eliza came back. Twyla is always talked about more. Again, and what I love about Vanuatu's endgame is what you said. Like there were so many winning past the victory for so many of these endgame players that really it could have broken down into so many different ways. It's great that Chris came out on top because he's a great, really fun player to watch. But I think it would have been really great to see a lot of these other players do well too, and they were this close. So I put Leanne at number 3.
I love the Leanne pick because no one remembers Leanne, so that
Nobody
very
does.
much fits the criteria.
And I think the reason why Leanne is a little bit less edited than Amy, one, I think Amy pops a little bit more, but I do think that back then you have a blind side of that caliber. You don't want it to be the person who you're kind of attaching to. Like Survivor wasn't ready for that yet. And so I think that that's why Amy is who we see a little bit more of, so that when Leanne goes home, it doesn't hurt as much. And we're not like, oh man, like that sucked. And we still think Amy could rebound. And obviously doesn't, but that's what we're thinking. Fun fact about Leanne is my landlord in LA, when I was going in, I was telling him how like I had a friend who worked on the show and all of that. And he was like, oh, that's interesting. My wife's best friend played on that show. And I was like, oh, who was it? And he was like, you wouldn't know. It was a long time ago. I was like, try it. Like, trust me. And he said Leanne. And I was like, oh yeah, 7th place on Vanuatu. And he was like, I don't even think she remembers she was 7th place on Vanuatu. But my landlord in LA, there you go. One of his wife's best friends is Leanne, of all people. And when you hear that like in public, you're like, what? Like, you know who Leanne is? That's crazy because like Survivor fans don't know who Leanne is.
I mean, I had that come up to me. Like usually I've only ever met one Survivor player in the history of covering this stuff. And it wasn't even an American Survivor player. And I did have my stepmom message me one day, like 2 years ago, and was like, I just met somebody who played Survivor apparently. I'm like, what? And I'm like, okay, who? Like trivia time. Let's figure this out. And it was Trish from Pearl Islands.
So random.
And
wow.
I'm like, all right,
Wrong
that
Trish.
is actually one of the players I would not be able to tell you anything about.
Yeah.
If it
She was
pretty
on a
funny,
season. She did some. That
She
is so
sure
funny
played.
though, when that kind of thing happens, or it's just such a
What
random.
was funny is that my stepmom was like, apparently she like almost won the season, and I'm like, I thought she was initially thinking of like Kim Johnson because of the way she was describing her, but I'm like, oh no, this is Trish from Pearl. I'm like, no, she never came close. Maybe
Trish's final
fan
placement
fiction.
was like 14th, maybe.
Yeah,
because
like
of
maybe she got voted back and like fan fiction worked out in her favor. It could have been a possible, but I don't know.
Yikes. All right, my number 3, I have Kelly Goldsmith from Survivor Africa.
Love that.
Absolutely forgotten. And an honorable mention for my men was Brandon Quinton, because I love Brandon Quinton. And Brandon Quinton ruined this season by making it better by not voting out Lex at Final 9. And he should have done it. And I think it actually would have made Africa worse. Although now from the perspective that we
could
can
have
watch,
a T-Bird winning.
True. I'm saying at the time, I think people would have been very mad, but I think watching it back, we'd be like, damn, that was funny. That was awesome. Cause we've had Lex on this podcast a couple times. A little part of me is like, yeah, that would have been pretty crazy if Lex went home at Final 9 there. But Kelly is, I would argue, one of the first actual strategists on Survivor, and it doesn't work. It works against her ultimately, and she does go home. It should have worked. Brandon drank whatever Kool-Aid Lex gave him. And if he doesn't do that, it's an easy 5-4 swap. And we'd be arguing that Kelly Goldsmith was the orchestrator of the first minority-majority alliance swap in the history of Survivor. That would have been amazing. And of all people, and I don't think she gets the credit she deserves, because ultimately at the episode where she should have been able to flip that, she actually goes home. And so people kind of forget about her and forget how good her game was. And not for nothing, she wasn't a huge fan favorite. She does come across quite crude at times. And you know, like she's I don't know, she's an acquired taste. I think she's great. I know Alexa loves her, but I do understand why she wasn't necessarily coming right back out for another season. But if we don't see Parvati come back from Micronesia, because, you know, one more person they wanted to say yes says yes, I think there's a very good chance Kelly Goldsmith could have been one of those people who was shortlisted as a possible for heroes versus villains, and she would have been a phenomenal villain because she had some great one-liners, she had some great confessionals, and it would have been a good way to represent one of the earlier seasons that wasn't Australia, which we all obviously knew. So I don't think we'll ever see Kelly Goldsmith again. I think she's like a teacher somewhere now. She's like a professor or something, but such an entertaining, and that's one of my top females.
I love that pick. I love that pick.
I knew you would, and that's why I was waiting for Alexa to say it first.
I didn't have her on my list, but yeah, she's definitely somebody that came to my mind. I was like going through the season by season. I was like, I could put Kelly. Like, it's just there's a lot. Like, I do wonder what happens if Brandon flips. That's something that I talked about as one of the worst underreported bad moves in the history of the show is Brandon flipping and screwing Kelly over. But we do get obviously the Lex being paranoid for the rest of that season, and it's a fun season on some level, regardless of Kelly going out. So not even halfway into it. But
I think it was a good thing for Survivor at the time. And I think Survivor needed a buddy season because all the seasons before that were kind of like, these guys don't really like each other, but they work together. Tina and Colby have to work with Keith, and Richard and Kelly have to work with Sue, and they don't really necessarily like Sue, and Sue doesn't like Kelly and all that. And I think Survivor kind of needed a season where it was like, you can just be friends and get to the end, and Tom and Lex and Ethan are so incredibly popular. All of them come back for All-Stars and all of that stuff. But man, like the game body guy.
I think Ethan is one of the most likable winners, arguably the most likable winner. So it did work out for the better.
It worked out, but from the perspective now of somebody who's talked about the show a million times, damn, that would have been a good blindside. That would have been an amazing blindside, and that would have changed the game a season earlier than the game ended up being changed. I think John Carroll does better on Marquesas because he sees that things can actually go wrong for him if this didn't go quite so well for Lex here. I have one man and one woman left, and I'm going to jump both of you because everybody knows who my man is, and I'm going to put them here. My number 27th greatest player of all time, and I'm ready for your eyes to pop out of your head. Maddie Whitmore, the most underrated ever. Peridiam is just cringing, and he's got his hand over his eyes. Maddie Whitmore is the winner of Survivor Gabon if Sugar isn't crazy. He is on Heroes versus Villains instead of I don't know who he would have replaced, but he would have replaced somebody. And he would have been on Winners at War. He would have been one of the most popular winners in the history of the show if Sugar didn't lose her mind. And instead, everybody forgets that he's really the only likable person on that entire season, and that he's the only one that you could possibly get behind rooting for, other than maybe Bob. I am a huge Maddie Whitmore fan. I love that he proposed to his girlfriend out there on the island in an actually cool way before we get to season. I guess
I don't think they made it.
Did they not make it? That doesn't matter to me. I like that.
Yeah, they didn't make it.
That's fine. I didn't know that. I don't care. It's still a great move for him.
I don't care.
He can go on and tell everybody that. And you know what? That's even more of a reason why Maddie Whitmore should be on your list and should be playing Survivor again, because he needs to go out there and propose to somebody else. Nothing worked out for him in Survivor Gabon. And look, Sugar, everybody can say what they want about Sugar. I think she's unbelievably entertaining. I think she is one of the most important characters in the history of Survivor. I think she's that big. But her decision to make Bob and Maddie make fire against each other changed the course of Survivor. Because if Maddie wins that season and not Bob, I just think you have a different perspective on villains kind of in Survivor, because not that Bob was a villain, and he certainly wasn't, but to have a hero come out of that season the way Maddie was, I really think would have kind of changed the perspective for what ends up being a very villain heavy group of seasons with 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. It's a very villain heavy, because that seems to be what plays. And I think if a hero would have won Gabon, that might have actually changed the course of that.
Was Bob not a hero? He was kind of a hero.
He was
the grandfather in the Garden.
He wasn't the hero, though.
Also, the fake idol play with Randy ruins his hero status. And I know at the time we sit there and we're like, hey,
he did admonish Sugar. He was like, hey, no, not cool. Don't laugh.
But he still did it.
He did still do it. Yeah, I mean, without it, it wasn't horrible. It's probably the best move Bob had, And
I will say, Bob is probably my favorite. Well, he's probably the only winner in the history of Survivor who I liked from day one and ended up going on to win the game. He's the only winner who I was like, day one, that's my favorite guy. Before the pregame press and all that stuff started coming out, that was my favorite guy. When he's up there climbing and he's fixing the hatch, I'm like, I want this guy to win. And then he won. And it's funny that like he's actually one of the less popular winners in the history of the show. But Maddie Whitmore, man, telling you, he's so unbelievably underrated. Just go watch Gabon and see what he does and see how he deals with those insane people. And I mean that with love to all of them. But he handles it incredibly. And Alexa, we just watched Nothing Tastes Better Than $500. When he sits there next to Randy and Randy's in his grump mood and he's ready to burn down the house, and Maddie's just like literally like, oh, don't do this. Why are you doing this? Just stop.
Yeah.
And it's just like so defeated. I love Maddie Whitmore, and he is my number one man who is forgotten and should play Survivor again, and absolutely 100% never will.
Won't.
Yeah. That's what I got.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's definitely controversial. I could see that. I didn't know. I remembered hearing that you had put a couple people or so that were like controversial up high. Did Maddie was Maddie in the top 100 for us?
No, he didn't actually make the final list because I think I was the only one
bumped him that high.
Yeah, I was the only one who put him in, and it wasn't even enough to. Yeah, that's it.
Wow.
To do that. So yeah, he ended up being my number 27, and yes, I put him ahead of Sarah Lucina, which pissed off everybody in the Survivor community. So
I wonder if Maddie did benefit at all from Sugar. Also, like you're like he lost because of how crazy she got at the end and basically threw the game. I wonder did if any of that helped her, because like I think Sugar viewed both Bob and Maddie as like the two most worthy people to take to the end. So I think she was hoping to get rid of Susie and Kenny and Crystal and take Maddie and Bob to the final three. It's just Sugar or Susie got in the way of that.
Yeah, she did, because Susie won the final three immunity challenge, and they were hoping that it would be the other three and Susie would go home at 4.
I think that might be why Kenny was also like the logic behind Kenny going at final 5 instead of final 4 is because it was either Ken or Susie, and they figured Susie was less likely to win. That was my thought process. So I don't know, but yeah, that's an interesting take. Yeah. I know he's not terrible. I've always thought he's okay, but like it's hard for me to gauge like the strategic competence of Gabon's players.
I agree with that, and I do love Gabon, and I do love the strategy of Gabon, and I do love what goes on in Gabon. So like for me, Maddie, like I mean the other thing is too, if he gets to the final 3 against anybody from that final 4, he wins.
Yeah. He's the shoo-in winner. He beats all of them. He beats Bob, of course.
And I think that speaks volumes because you have to win the season you're on. And I think that he had positioned himself perfectly. And really, Sugar pulls the wool over his eyes and somehow ends up on the hero tribe, while Danielle DiLorenzo ends up on the villain tribe for doing the exact same thing, where she tells Bob what's going to happen, and he can make fire all day, and Maddie has no idea it's coming. And so Maddie doesn't get to prepare, and Maddie ultimately goes home there, but he had positioned himself perfectly. He would have been a shoo-in winner. He would have been one of the most popular winners in the history of the show.
Basically, if Susie doesn't win Final Four, you could say Maddie might have been the winner on some level. I think that's a possibility. If Susie doesn't win the Final Four immunity.
Yeah.
Look at that.
That's close.
She's a game changer. Susie is a huge game changer. The ripple effect.
All right, Peridiam. All right. Calm down. We're not getting there. Yeah, I'll give you some of this, but I can't give you all of this. Yeah, no, that's my take.
Alexa, were you gonna ask something or?
Oh no, it was just confirming that Susie should have been a game changer.
Okay,
yes.
There you go.
Who's your number 2?
Okay, my number 2 is a player who definitely bungled the end game. It was just one move that would cost this player the game. But it was, I guess you could point back to a few other things too. I put Rafe from Guatemala.
He is my number 2.
Look at
there
that.
you go. Great minds think alike.
I think
he's never coming back. So
yeah, he's killing it as
led Guatemala strategically.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, I mean Rafe is like on a captain season. He's kind of like the Sophie to the coach of the season, where he's harboring his goat. He wants to take Stephanie to the final 2. He sets himself up as best as he thinks he is going into the end game. He takes out all the players that Stephanie will never be able to take to the final 2 over him, with like Jamie and Judd, and like all these players could be a final 2 losing player. Stephanie might be able to beat them, but he ultimately garners Stephanie's trust the most. He calls the most shots. He wins 4 individual challenges and immunity challenges, which is crazy. He was surprised himself. I wouldn't say he's like so forgotten. I do think he sort of, for me, fits into the same role as Ian in that they back-to-back played these third place, really good, commendable games, strategic forces. I mean, Rafe was definitely at the top of that list for Guatemala. He's the brains of that season. And if it wasn't like, people will harp on him a lot for taking Lydia out at Final Four over Danny. And I think there's a good argument to be made that he didn't do the wrong thing. It just didn't work out in his favor, with the final immunity challenge being the weird challenge that it was, and the fact that it kind of broke. And I don't think the producers intended it for it to be the way it was. It would have definitely favored him if Lydia was there, I think, based on the platform and the weird stuff. I think it might have. But nonetheless, I still think he is, I would say, at least second best one-time player who was this close to winning.
Yeah, and Alexa, before you pretty much say why you have him, I just want to say the reason I didn't put him is because everybody always says Rafe should play again. That's my main reason why I didn't put him there. But Alexa, what was your reasoning since you both had him at 2?
Actually, I mean, my 2 and my 1 have both been mentioned. My 2 was Rafe and my 1 was Twyla. So both of them have already been pretty covered. But I think you hit the nail on the head, Peridiam. Like, he's a good character. He's no game bot. Like, we're not at a point in Survivor where there are game bots yet, but he, I think he really runs the game strategically. I think Stephanie and Judd think that they do, but I think him and Danny have a really good relationship, and I think their duo really makes Guatemala what it is.
Yeah. I think Rafe, it gets talked about a lot in the community, which is why I didn't put him, but also, like, I don't know. I feel like we've seen other Rafes, and I do think that Rafe would be a good one, and probably, Danger Dave Ball is on my list, so maybe Rafe should have been ahead of him. But I do think that Rafe, to me, has kind of, now that Guatemala has had a player play again, I've kind of like,
they're all spoken for.
Go ahead, Guatemala. Like, and Gary's my guy from Guatemala, so I always go for Gary more because Rafe is always being brought up in these. I wish he was on a second chance season, and Gary isn't. So I kind of lean more with the likable old Gary, who none of you agree with.
Like your old man.
No, Gary's okay. He's fine. Yeah. I like Gary. I like that he's the first to find that out and all that. I just do think, like, Rafe is just he played such a good game for Guatemala, and it took like another weird wacky end game to take him out. And he was he was a fan of the show. He anticipated, like, the older women tend to have that stamina to win those final 3 immunity challenges. So Lydia was a smaller woman, and she was older, and I think she was quite likable and could have won the jury over Danny, who was sickly. And so, like, it kind of made sense, but didn't work out. So. Yeah.
Well, Peridiam, I'm going to let you go last, and I'm going to go ahead of you because, guest, had you go first. I'll have you go last. So there you go. My last one is a woman. I had a lot of honorable mentions for the women. I had Gretchen on here. I had Tammy Leitner on here. I thought she's so underrated. I did have Leanne, Amy, Crystal Cox, I think is an underrated one. Jamie, even possibly from China. I think she's somebody who kind of just gets kind of thrown to the side. Jacqueline, Lisa, Sydney, those are my people. But my number one, how in the world had they never played again after what happened and how big of a phenomenon they were? Christy Smith from Survivor Amazon.
Love that pick.
Did she never play again? Because really, if you think about it, that news that a deaf woman was playing Survivor was like monumental. It was insane. People couldn't believe, how is she going to do anything out there? At night, she can't see what's going on. How is she going to be able to communicate with them? How is she ever going to be able to play this game like that? It's the hardest game ever. 4 seasons earlier, we watched a guy fall into a fire and like almost die. Like, how is this going to happen? And for her to be the first, I don't want to say like handicapped, but like the first person with a disability to play Survivor and to do as well as she did. And really, her own hubris is why she goes home. She could have gone so much further, but she pulls the Sarah Lucina before Sarah Lucina was cool. And she pulls that same exact thing where it's like, no, 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 no. And Rob says, you know what? Go home. Leave me alone. But her making it all the way down to final 6. And man, there is an alternate reality where Christy Smith is sitting in the final 3, possibly the final 2. And I just think her game is very underrated. Yes, there are times where, there's certain things where it's like, is she pushing too hard? What is she doing? But she would have beaten Jenna. in my opinion. I think people would have just respected what she did to get to the end. I actually think she would have had a hard time beating Matt von Ertfelder than she would have beating Jenna, as weird as that is, because Jenna wiped the floor with Matt. But I don't know. I just think that Christy overcame so much out there, and it was all anybody talked about on that season. Yes, by the time Heidi and Jenna got naked for chocolate and peanut butter, everybody was only talking about that. But really, Sesternino was popular, but without the crazy message boards and all of that stuff going on, Christy was the story of this season. And the fact that a deaf woman made it as far as she did and was able to adapt and ultimately shoot herself in the foot. I mean, I'm shocked people don't talk about her more as like what is she even doing? Like, what is Christy doing? That's who I don't think Dalton Ross had an interview with her, but that's who I would want Dalton Ross to interview. And I would love to know if she would play again, because she deserves a second shot.
I love that pick because there's nobody who would say that.
Yeah, it wasn't on my radar.
Yeah, I love that pick. Love it.
She was
but you're right. Like, she adapts like she plays the Ultimate Survivor game where she adapts and then shoots herself in the foot. Like, how many times has that happened before? But for her to adapt in a completely different way and in candidly a much harder way than anybody else, I think that's great.
And it opened the door for like, okay, this can work. You know, we see Chad come out and play then only 3 seasons later. And that, you know, it just did it, like, let everybody know that, like, you know what, like, this is something that's possible. Even, you know, can you overcome this? And Christy was a great representative for that. I mean, if Christy goes home at Final Four, or, you know, 4 people in, 3 people in, who knows if she actually goes anywhere, but she bonded well with the guys, and hers and Butch's relationship is actually kind of endearing. And, I don't know. I think she's just a really likable. She was a really likable character. She was really fun. And we've never seen anybody like Christy since Christy played. And I still think she voted for Jenna because she was confused. I really do. I still think she thinks that she was voting out Jenna.
Does she get a voting confessional? Like, I know that's a big theory, but does she say anything at her voting confessional?
I don't know, honestly.
I'll have to go back. Someone will have to go back and check.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I know I've talked to Rob about this move. Especially the only time I really talked to Rob Sesternino on his podcast was over a year and a half ago, right after Edge of Extinction. And I talked specifically about this vote out. That was one of our conversations. And he says this was his biggest mistake in the game. This is where he basically lost the game looking back. Like, if he could have changed anything, it was not voting out Christy. He should have voted out Jenna when she gave up immunity to Heidi at the final 6. And, you know, he said he was eager and he just jumped on it, but he shouldn't have. But yeah, it is possible that if Jenna goes at the final 6, you know, Heidi probably goes at final 5, and maybe Christy is in the Jenna spot.
Yeah, absolutely. Because Christy could have won all of those immunities at the end.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think it's a interesting what if.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's what I got. That's my list. Peridiam, take us home with your number 1.
Oh, right. Because Alexa, you had who was your number 1?
Twyla Tanner.
Twyla, right. Okay. So my number 1 is probably the most unorthodox in the sense related to the rest of my list. And that's because this is a player who is actually the most recent. They played not long ago, but based on what I've heard from them postseason, I don't think they're coming back. And much to my wife's chagrin, she's really disappointed this player isn't coming back. It is a guy. They played on I would say they're one of the most robbed players in the history of the show. I think you might have an idea. I think maybe Alexa has an idea.
I think I figured it out.
Who is it?
I think it's Devin from Heroes, Healers, Hustlers.
It is. It's Devin. I put Devin down because Devin has said he doesn't want to play again. And the fact that he's straight up said that, and I know lots of people say it, but given that's the last I know of Devin's ability to wanting to play Survivor, that automatically puts him on the contention for being on this list. He's probably not going to play again. Is he forgotten? Definitely not. Like, people remember Devin really. They love Devin. He was really likable. He could have won. I think he would have won most likely if he made that final 3. But Devin did a lot of really great stuff. I think that between his ability to play the game well on his first time, his only time, and the fact that he doesn't want to come back tells me he's perfect for this list. He is so recent, so like he doesn't fit into the usual like theme of this podcast, which is we're mostly talking about like the first 20 seasons of the show. He is the only other player in the 30s other than Rodney that I put on my list, and he just happens to be at the top of it. But I think Devin played an excellent game in HHH. He does so many things so well. He has things taken away. He gets his vote stolen from him at that swap tribe where he was the swing vote. He did a great job integrating between the two. They both were vying for him between Joe and Alan, and he had the vote taken away from him. That was a really funny moment. And then at the Final Four, he gets the Final Four vote taken away from him as well, where he should have been able to vote Ben out under normal circumstances. Obviously, by modern circumstances, it's a different story. But at the time, watching that happen was really heartbreaking for me, seeing Devin lose, when I do think looking into the postseason, I think he had the votes to beat Chrissy and Ryan. And it's unfortunate that such an unprecedented thing happened. This isn't like Silas in the final 12 or 13. This isn't a strange merge. This is the Final Four. This is the last vote of the season that Devin has done a really good job getting to. He does the amazing Final Five vote where he votes for Dr. Mike that saves his butt, where he should have been voted out because Ben played his third straight idol. So I just think there's a lot to talk about with Devin in the game that he played. It's becoming underreported as the seasons keep piling on, and I don't, unfortunately, think we will ever see him again. Maybe in like a blood versus water season. I don't know, but like for me,
he would play with his mom because his mom is the fan.
Yeah, and
Right.
maybe we'll see him. I'm like, I like him a lot. I would love to see him come back. From what I'm gauging, I don't expect him to ever. And I think he played the best game of these 10 players that I have here and the honorable mentions. So
yeah, I had
him number one.
I had him
That's a
in
good
like
pick.
my 60s on the top 100 that I made. So still behind Pascal and Maddie and obviously all of them. But I do agree with you. Like, I think if we had done this 5 seasons from now, or I guess not even 5 seasons, but maybe like another year. I don't know when Survivor's coming back, but a little bit more removed from Devin, I think that I probably would have considered him. But really, my cutoff, the last honorable mention I had was Sydney from Co-Wrong. I didn't have anybody from beyond that. So
yeah,
but
he's the only one I have on my list that's like
again.
that modern. So
yeah. Damn. Well, now if any of these players ever do somehow play again, we have to change our list because we butchered it. And if any of my players ever play again, I will be so ecstatic because that'll let me know that they're still alive, which is important to me. So. All right, I'm going to run through mine one more time. I think we should just run through them one more time, give everybody the lowdown. I think everybody's going to listen because it was a nice, thorough discussion. But I had Danger Dave Ball at 10, Sierra Reed at 9, Taj George at 8, Pascal English at 7, Twyla Tanner at 6, Gary Hawkins Hogaboom at 5, Burton Roberts at 4, Kelly Goldsmith at 3, 27th greatest player of all time, Maddie Whitmore at 2, and Christy Smith at number 1. Alexa, who you got?
I'm not going to do mine 10-1 because I crossed them all out. So I'm going to do men and then women. I have Rafe Judkins, Hayden Moss, Albert Destrade, Kenny, Marty, Dina, Twyla Tanner, Taj, Johnson George, Sabrina Thompson, and Sydney.
And Alexa, if it makes you feel better, you had Marty at 10, Sabrina at 9, Albert at 8, Kenny at 7, Sydney at 6, Hayden at 5, Taj at 4, Dina at 3, Rafe at 2, Twyla at 1. I did write them all down.
That is why I keep you around, Phil. Thank you very much.
Peridium, what'd you have?
I had Greg from Palau at number 10, Lisa Welchel at number 9, Trish from Cagayan at number 8, Ian Rosenberger at number 7, Rodney Lavoie Jr. from Worlds Apart at number 6, Chase Rice, number 5, Julie Berry, Vanuatu, number 4, Leanne, also from Vanuatu at number 3, Rafe Judkins, Guatemala, number 2, and Devin Pinto from Heroes, Healers, Hustlers at number 1.
I love all of these lists.
Yeah, this was a very fun podcast, and this is exactly what I think we wanted. We wanted to talk like older school Survivor, more of like classic kind of moments. And I mean, like you said, Peridium, we talked about Vanuatu a lot tonight, and that's always a good podcast as far as I'm concerned. I love talking about Vanuatu, and this was a lot of fun. I mean, I don't know what our plans are going to be moving forward, but I would love to be able to do something with you again because, it's a nice, thorough discussion that went 2 hours and 12 minutes and has pushed back mine and Alexa's Patreon podcast. Let's just put it that way.
Maybe next time we'll cast a new Game Changers cast.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
That's
a 3-hour podcast there.
And we're not allowed to actually use Game Changers. We have to use people that aren't.
It has to, exactly. It has to be people who are not Game Changers, but you can make the argument, an obscure argument. That
or maybe
I actually kind of like this.
Make the argument.
Yeah.
But yeah, Peridium, it was great having you on. It's good to see you popping around here. Everybody knows where you are, but why don't you just tell everybody anyways, just in case this is the first interaction they've ever had with you?
Yeah, and thank you guys for having me. Of course, the moment you reached out, I was like, absolutely, and I would love to do it again in the future. I'm going to be just putting out more content, I think, and I'm going to see if I can get even more Survivor content going out. Even though I'm really focused at the moment on Big Brother. If you don't know who I am, I run a YouTube channel called Peridiam, Peridiam. And I put out weekly videos. I've been doing it since the middle of Heroes, Healers, and Hustlers with Devin. I make a weekly video about Survivor or Big Brother, and I talk about all facets of these shows, from strategy to characters to anything goes, really. Like you have a video idea you might think would be an interesting topic, you can throw it at me. I'm on Twitter as well, at my real name, which is Billy Geis, and that's where I'm at. So you'll find me there, and I'm soon going to be introducing, I did mention it 3 months ago before Big Brother All Stars 2, but I didn't start it yet. I have a Twitch channel coming out, and I'm going to be doing that in the off season going forward, just for something more to do with our time now that Big Brother's over, especially, and we have no Survivor on the horizon, no Big Brother on the horizon, unfortunately. I know Big Brother 23 was renewed, but it's not for another year. So I'll be on Twitch at Peridiam, so you can find me there in the near future. But that's it. Thank you, guys.
Alexa, tell everybody what we've been doing and take us out of here.
We've been doing a lot, but after this crazy week, we're finally back to a semi-normal schedule. We are, we just accidentally missed the entire Big Brother season. So instead what we're doing is we're watching The Amazing Race. So this coming Wednesday, we're going to keep that going. We will be recapping The Amazing Race at 9 Eastern right after the episode airs. And then after that, we'll be continuing our rewatch of Survivor China. So we'll be recapping the 8th episode. Both of those podcasts, we will be joined by two of our patrons, Annabelle and Ian. They'll be joining us. Annabelle will be joining us for The Amazing Race, and Ian will be joining us for Survivor China. And after that, we're heading towards Thanksgiving, so we are going to probably just be a little lighter on the schedule, but we have a lot of good stuff coming up, especially after the holidays, but hopefully some more collaborations. But in the meantime, we've been putting out a lot of patron content, so if you go to patreon.com/Survivor Specialists, you guys can find everything that we've been doing there. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can listen anywhere you listen to your podcasts. And that's all we have for you. So hope you guys enjoyed this crazy week. Peridiam, thank you so much for coming on. This was a really cool collaboration.
Thank you for having me.